Firstly, as opposed to World Cups in the past where only 32 could qualify, now it's up to 48. CONMEBOL qualifiers are the earliest to start, of course, with the first games actually playing tonight. That is as of the upload date of this video. For 2022, only a minimum of 4 teams could automatically qualify for the big dance, while 1 went to the Intercontinental playoffs. However, this time there will be 6 that can automatically qualify, with another going to the Intercontinental playoffs. This is a pretty significant change considering the fact that more than half of South America can now qualify for the World Cup, which only means it'll be an even more impressive feat when Venezuela once again don't qualify. My personal favorite, the Asian qualifiers, start their first round next month. 95% of you people don't care about these matches, but I'll make sure you're heavily invested by next month. Last AFC qualifier saw 4 countries automatically qualify, while 2 teams advanced to a playoff round. Winner of said playoff would then go on to the Intercontinental playoffs to have a chance at qualifying. For 2026 though, the number of automatic qualification slots has doubled. 8 countries are now able to punch a ticket to the international spectacle, while 1 more can go through the Intercontinental playoffs. Into my birth month of November, we have African qualifiers. In the past, only 5 African nations have been able to qualify for the World Cup. That number is now up to 9 with an extra slot in the Intercontinental playoffs. I'm going to be saying that quite a lot. The first qualifiers to begin in 2024 is CONCACAF in March. Due to all the top North American sides being hosts, these qualifiers will be filled with wildcard nations. Along with the US, Mexico, and Canada, 3 other nations will qualify automatically, while 2 have the opportunity to play in through. Then in September of 2024, Oceania kicks off their qualifiers. And thanks to the increase from 32 teams to 48, OFC now has a guaranteed spot. That is on top of the ever so famous Intercontinental slot they've held for years. March 2025 will finally give us European qualifiers. 13 teams qualified for 2022, but in 2026, 16 teams will be able to qualify, which will be even funnier when Italy inevitably fail again. Finally, a few months before the tournament in 2026, we have the Intercontinental playoffs, which will be a 6-team playoff tournament to determine the last 2 spots. There will be 2 CONCACAF nations and 1 country from the rest of the confederations except UEFA. Now back to our main topic for today. CONMEBOL. There are 2 sides to South American qualifiers. On one hand, you got infinite amounts of flair for players eager to put on a show for their people. This is where stars come to cement themselves as gods in their country, because here, football is a religion. On the other hand is what I can only describe as the WWF Attitude Era. Actually, scratch that. It's whatever the f is listed here. Every inch of the pitch must be fought for with ferocity only awakened by playing in these types of matches. This is the epitome of grit and grind, as all the players want nothing more than to play on the world stage. Neil Warnock would fit in beautifully here because 110%.
You've got to f***ing die to get 3 points!
But don't let that make you forget this continent has some of the best fans in the world. The atmospheres here would kill a Victorian child within 1 zeptosecond. So with that out of the way, let's meet our fighters, and we'll start with Venezuela. Venezuela has never qualified for the World Cup in 12 attempts. In fact, they're the only CONMEBOL member to have never qualified for a single World Cup.
Is it okay that I feel like I don't want to live anymore?
Yes, Bobby, that's normal.
The closest they've ever gotten to qualifying is when they finished 6th in 2014. However, in the last campaign, they finished dead last with just 10 points. This year, the national team has brought in new head coach Fernando Batista, who wants to play an aggressive style of football. La Vinotinto has some pretty interesting pieces. Solomon Rondon is the all-time leading scorer for the national team and scored 7 in 10 games last year. Striker Joseph Martinez has been lighting it up for Inter Miami as of recent. And keep an eye on midfielder Yangel Herrera. So far, to begin this season, he started really well for Girona. Next, there's the sea-level merchants themselves. Bolivia. When they're playing in the exosphere, they're like prime Barcelona, but anywhere else and you'd think Montserrat was playing on that pitch. Unlike Venezuela, obviously, Bolivia has actually played in a World Cup. Bolivia actually was invited to the first ever World Cup in 1930 and then qualified for 1950 and 1994. As you can see, it's definitely been a while for football's Denver Broncos. And what's definitely not helping Bolivian football right now is the fact that clubs are failing to pay their players for months, leading them to fix matches to make income. Fortunately, La Verde still have striker Marcelo Moreno, a man who practically adds another 1,000 feet of altitude the way he carries this team. In fact, he finished with 10 goals in the 2022 World Cup Cup qualifiers, the most of any other South American player. Then we have Paraguay, who over a decade ago had some pretty good success. Los Guaraníes have qualified for 7 World Cups, with their best finish coming in 2010 when they reached the quarterfinals. Since then, though, the World Cup has not seen Paraguay. However, as of recent, the country has discovered newfound hope in star player Miguel Almiron and some uber promising talents. 19-year-old attacking midfielder Julio Enciso is currently injured, but he'll definitely make an impact once he comes back. 24-year-old striker Roberto Morales actually scored on his debut against Ecuador in the last cycle, and ideally in the next few windows we could see Enzo Gonzalez, who just made a move to Wolves from Libertad at just 18 years old. Just under a decade ago, Chile used to be one of the best nations in CONMEBOL. Round of 16 appearances in 2010 and 2014 during the start of their golden generation, and then of course they had the Copa America wins in both 2015 and 2016. Although I will say in the 2014 World Cup, Chile should have been in the quarterfinals. Brazilians, don't lie to me, you know it's true. However, Chile's best finish in the World Cup actually goes all the way back to 1962 when they finished 3rd as hosts. But all those glory days are in the past. The core which made this team so great is light years past its prime. And the next generation... yeah. But someone who could be pivotal for this team is Ben Baraton Diaz, a man who was born in Stoke-on-Trent, England. Back in 2021, a bunch of fans created a campaign to get Baraton Diaz a call-up to the national team after they found out he was half Chilean on Football Manager. And since his debut, the Chilean has scored 7 goals in 21 appearances and has become kind of a cult hero for the country. The tale of Colombia in World Cup 2022 qualifiers is one that fans will definitely want to forget. Los Cafeteros started pretty well, were 4th in qualifiers, and were pretty much on track to make a trip to Qatar. But then, this team went 7 straight matches without scoring a single goal.
Hurry it up, will ya? We're hungry over here, look at us! My kids haven't eaten!
Colombia strikers were drier than Icarus's personality in Eternals, and much like my joy of seeing Icarus die on the big screen, I'm sure Colombians were very happy to finally see the end of this qualification campaign. But it was genuinely impressive to see a team generate so many shots and not score a single one of them. So in the end, after a promising start, the Colombians finished 6th and failed to qualify. However, Colombia is back. And better. Since the arrival of head coach Nestor Lorenzo, the team has gone unbeaten with 6 wins and 2 draws. One of those wins includes a 2-0 victory against Germany, a historic result for Los Cafeteros. In total, Colombia has qualified for 6 World Cups. You would think they have qualified for more, but you have to remember, this is South America. It's very competitive. And I'm pretty sure in 2002 they were ranked 9th in the world and didn't qualify for the tournament. 2014 though saw their best result when they reached the quarters, and had the ref not been Brazil's 12th man, it would have probably been the semis. With young players like Luis Diaz, Luis Sinisterra, and Joan Duran mixed into an experienced core of James Rodriguez, Juan Cuadrado, Davison Sanchez, and Yerry Mina, Colombia have a good chance of redeeming themselves for the terrorism they committed last year. Peru were on the verge of qualifying for World Cup 2022. And then they met their biggest nightmare. While ChatGPT figures out the biggest club in Peru, the national team prepares for qualification under new manager Juan Reynoso. Former manager Ricardo Gareca had taken Peru to incredible heights, so it'll be interesting to see how the team fares under new management. The farthest Peru has gone in the World Cup was the quarters back in 1970, while their most recent appearance was in 2018. The only concern I have for Peru is the fact that their core is only getting older, and they actually start this window without their main striker, Gianluca Lapadula. Before 2002, Ecuador had never qualified for a World Cup, but since then they've made it to the World Football Gala 4 times over the last 6 editions. Their best performance saw them reach the round of 16 in 2006. Latri came so close to mirroring that last year, but lost to Senegal. Nonetheless, Ecuadorians go into the 2026 World Cup qualifiers with a new manager in Felix Sanchez. Yes, that Felix Sanchez. 21-year-old midfielder Moises Caicedo should play a big role in this campaign, along with Pervis Estupiñán, who has been thriving at Brighton so far, and striker Enner Valencia. He may be 33 years old, but he has shown no signs of stopping. 3 goals in World Cup 2022, and 2 more in 2 games this year. However, in this window, Ecuador will be missing the contributions of fullback Pierre Hincapié. By the way, you might be wondering, why does Ecuador have negative points? Well, that's due to them falsifying birth documents for Byron Castillo during the last cycle. Already not a great start, and then you remember, they played the world champions on match day 1. Uruguay had a pretty disappointing World Cup campaign last year. As a result, they sacked their manager and brought in Marcelo Bielsa. Bielsa is creating a new era, it appears, as he's opted for a younger squad. No Cavani, no Suarez, and there's only one player that's 30 years old. The head coach is well known for his high-intensity football, so with a bunch of energetic youngsters, this could be a match made in heaven. I'm especially looking forward to him working with the likes of Darwin Núñez, Federico Valverde, and new boy Manuel Ugarte. Perhaps we could even see Facundo Pellistri make his breakout. Uruguay has won the World Cup twice, back in 1930 and 1950. You could also count the Olympics prior, which is why they have 4 stars, but they also have 3 fourth place finishes from 1954, 1970, and most infamously 2010. To many, Brazil were favorites going into World Cup 2022. Please don't show my But in the end, like they always do, Seleção lost to a European team in the knockouts. The Brazilians have actually not beaten a European side in the knockouts since they won the tournament in 2002. And speaking of, I know they got 5 stars, but at some point we gotta talk about that 20-year World Cup title drought. We also need to talk about Neymar. There have been so many Joker moments for this guy that these Facebook posts that I found 2 years ago have become canon in his own house. 2014, he had the backbreaking incidents. 2018, he was clowned on for his dive, and also he went invisible against Belgium. 2021, Copa America, where he was basically a punching bag in the final, and of course you had 2022, where he didn't even get to take a penalty against Croatia. This man is the Eren Yeager of international football, and here I am wondering when his transformation will happen. Without the genocidal maniac part. But he's gonna be 34 by 2026, and he doesn't really have the player profile that fits a player that ages like a fine wine. So 2022 might have honestly been his last chance. But in the meantime, he can still do a lot of damage in qualifiers. There's no doubting the talent Brazil holds in their squad. It should be once again an easy route to the World Cup for them. That all said though, their manager is currently a caretaker, as they weren't able to get Carlo Ancelotti. But one more thing, and massive credit to the Federation for this. Recently, Antony was removed from the squad because it turns out he's a horrible piece of shit. Finally, we have the world champions, Argentina. Messi, after so many years of disappointment with the national team, finally had his moment, and it was oh so beautiful. Sure, you could talk about all the controversies, in hindsight. Let's be fair here, okay? I'm a Messi fan. I rooted for Argentina in that final. Some of those calls were a bit questionable, I can't lie. But thanks to their win in 2022, Argentina now has 3 World Cup titles, the others coming in 1970 and 1986. Now, the reason why Argentina have become less of a joke in the international football sphere is the fact that Scaloni has made them turn into a team with no remorse. On that pitch, every single game, and it's why Argentina has done so well in qualifiers and the World Cup now, is the fact that there's 11 assholes ready to give you the worst time of your entire life. And Messi is no exception either. This is no little boy from Rosario. This is a man who won't take anyone's shit anymore. That all said, with the coach they have, the attitude they have, all the quality players they also have, this should be a pretty easy run for Argentina. To officially begin World Cup 2026 qualifiers, we had Paraguay vs Peru. Paraguay dominated the first half, but were pretty unlucky not to score. And of course, this isn't a classic South American qualifier unless someone gets a red card. Ramon Sosa throughout the first half had been toasting Luis Advincula like a morning bagel. And in the 45th minute, Advincula ran out of ideas and received a second yellow. By the way, we're gonna keep up with every red card in this region with this tally right here. Into the second half, Paraguay continued to dominate. However, Pedro Gallese is there to make several stops. Then, for whatever reason, in the 86th minute, chaos ensues. It starts with 39-year-old Paulo Guerrero nearly stunning the Paraguayan crowd. 30 seconds later, Paraguay now have a chance. The first strike hits the post, and then the rebound hits the post. Within 45 seconds, we saw the ball hit the woodwork 3 times. But in the end, after 90 chaotic minutes, the match ends 0-0. Pedro Gallese takes all the credit for Peru, somehow escaping with a single point here as he made 6 saves that night. Colombia then took on Venezuela, and this would be the first test for Nestor Lorenzo. Unlike my IB exams, he passed, and Colombia won 1-0 in dominating fashion. If you remember from the preview, Ecuador is starting with -3 points, and they had the honor of playing the world champions in Buenos Aires.
Prayers tonight, but It's not good.
It was all Argentina throughout the first half, but luckily for the Ecuadorians, Lautaro Martinez still has cold feet. But enough nonsense, said the little magician from Rosario. Late into the 78th minute, Ecuador make the grave mistake of fouling a player right outside the box. The little alien who dropped down into a random Publix in Florida one day, like he has time and time again, makes it look so effortless and Argentina win 1-0. Over in Montevideo, Marcelo Bielsa's young Uruguayans cruise past the Chileans to earn all 3 points.
You look lonely.
I had the goal in the preview of pissing off as many Brazilians as physically possible. It definitely worked. So for a change, I'm going to only say positive things about Brazil in this review. The last fixture of matchday 1 was Brazil vs Bolivia. In Brazil. So quite like watching a fighting game cinematic movie on YouTube, the fight ended before it even started. More importantly though, Neymar would finally beat Pele's record and become Brazil's all-time leading scorer. The match ended in a bloodbath as Brazil won 5-1, a perfect way to start and forget everything that happened in 2022. What happened in 2022? Nothing. Matchday 2 started with Bolivian fans lighting fireworks in the middle of the night outside the hotel where the Argentinian national team was staying. Unfortunately for fans, their national team couldn't even beat Argentina with 5 seconds of sleep and no oxygen. Oh, and look at this, our second red card of the window. In all fairness to Bolivia, they started their campaign against the 2 best nations in South America. But needless to say, this window is one they'll definitely want to forget.
Don't grab nothing. Oh.
In search of their first 3 points, Ecuador played Uruguay, and a 16-year-old Kendry País made his debut. Ecuador started promising, but it would be Uruguay to score first. Latry didn't step off the gas, however, and defender Felix Torres equalizes before the half. Ender Valencia then had a chance to give Ecuador the lead on a penalty, but missed. And striker Ender Valencia, he may be 33 years old, but he has shown no signs of stopping. But then in the 61st minute, Kendry sends a ball into the box, and again, it's Felix Torres this time to give Ecuador the lead. After that goal, there was more urgency from Uruguay, but Ecuador did well to hold them off. Into stoppage time though, we got another case of classic CONMEBOL officiating. So after a controversial decision, Ecuador earn all 3 points and now have 0 points.
Ain't believing us. God did.
Having squandered their chances in the last match, Paraguay had the chance to make things right against Venezuela. History was on their side as La Albiroja hadn't lost a qualifier in Venezuela since 2001. But much like the New York Giants last weekend, the Paraguayans failed to score again. And this time they paid for their mistakes as Venezuela came closer and closer until finally they found a breakthrough in the 3rd minute of stoppage time. Next was Chile vs Colombia. They tricked us. Before the match between Peru and Brazil, Peruvian shamans were doing rituals to neutralize Neymar in Brazil. Could they potentially do that with my thoughts? It was seemingly working though, as Peru did well to hold off the flamboyant Brazilian samba. Right until the 90th minute. So at the end of the September window, this is the table so far. Don't get too excited. Brazil and Argentina end their windows with all 6 of 6 points. Colombia sit 3rd, having started pretty decently. They'll just hope to not be as underwhelming as they were versus Chile. Uruguay and Venezuela currently hold 4th and 5th. The challenge ramps up even more for Uruguay, who have a difficult October window ahead. Paraguay, Peru, and Chile each share a point. Paraguay in particular will be very disappointed in their performances this window. Ecuador would have been 5th with their win, but instead they sit with 0 points in 9th. And then there's Bolivia, with 2 losses and a -7 goal differential. If it wasn't already bad enough that they played the 2 best nations in the region, they play Ecuador next window.
Ain't you had enough punishment for one day?
Anyways, we'll start this video off with Asian qualifiers as they kick off this month. The first round is pretty simple. You get 20 Asian nations from the bottom of the barrel, put them through a 2-legged playoff tie, and the winner advances to the second round. I don't even mean that as an insult, by the way. This is literally the 20 worst ranked Asian nations in the world. So more than likely, most of the teams to advance out of these groups will become the whipping boys in the second round. However, there is a certain charm that I love about these types of matches. So without further ado, let's get into these matchups. Oh, almost forgot. I'm nearly 10,000 away from 200k, and I told you guys if we hit 200k before the end of the year, I'd give you San Marino episode 2. You know what to do. So first we have Afghanistan versus Mongolia. Afghanistan has never qualified for the World Cup, and they also haven't played at home since 2013 due to the Afghan crisis, which the US definitely didn't have anything to do with. They did, however, win the SAFF Championship, which consists of South Asian nations. That was back in 2013, and it was pretty impressive considering the team were banned from playing football during the Taliban regime between 1984 and 2002. Not to mention, there wasn't even a league until 2012. Afghanistan's all-time leading scorer is 32-year-old midfielder Faisal Shayeste, and he still actively plays. Mongolia has also never qualified for the World Cup. They've not even come close, but they've made steps in the right direction, as in 2022 qualifiers, Mongolia finally made it past the first round. Most internationals played their club football at FC Ulaanbaatar. Last year, Ulaanbaatar beat a team called Lions 12-0 in the Mongolian Premier League. Lions that season conceded 156 goals in 24 games. Outside of the national team though, there's a diehard Manchester United fan by the name of Ochivani Batbold who is currently cycling from Mongolia to Manchester. He hopes to arrive in Manchester sometime this December. Next we have a battle between two South Asian nations, the Maldives and Bangladesh. Despite never qualifying for a World Cup, the Maldives have a pretty rich history in the SAFF Cup, winning in 2008 and 2018. However, it doesn't seem like football in the country is going in the right direction because their last two performances saw them crash out in the groups. Currently, there's two forwards the nation can call upon. Ali Fasir and Nais Hassan have a combined 23 goals between them for the national team. Oh, by the way, there's a stadium in the Maldives called Pele Stadium, and the club that plays there has a Jabulani for their badge. Okay, for the rest of this video, just assume that the team hasn't qualified unless I say otherwise. Between the 80s and the 2000s, Bengali football was at its best. 2 runners-up finishes and 1 title in 2003 in the SAFF Championship. However, since 2011, the team has fallen off a cliff and things aren't looking any better. Bengali national team fans are very passionate, but not only just for Bangladesh. Since 1986, Argentina's national team has shaped the way Bengalis look at the sport, and despite literally no ties whatsoever, the country is filled with Albi Celeste superfans. Okay, so I'm starting to second guess myself here. I don't know if I'm supposed to say Bangladeshi or Bengali. I actually have no idea, so if you guys could just let me know in the comments, thanks. The relationship actually goes both ways as well. Argentines have been backing Bangladesh's cricket team as of recent. The third matchup is Southeast Asian representative Singapore versus US territory Guam. Singapore's best period came during the late 90s to early 2010s, where they had 3 AFF championships. AFF championships are like the SAFF, except with Southeast Asian nations. One player to look out for is forward Ilhan Fandi, son of the legendary Singaporean top scorer Fandi Ahmad. Also, shout out the goal difference on YouTube. His granddad is Kwan Kim Song, another legend in Singaporean football. Guam, on the other hand, they exist. Jokes aside, they're a tiny bit better than most people think. In World Cup 2018 qualifiers, they managed to beat India 2-1. And here's a quick population comparison between the two countries. Guam's all-time top scorer is 39-year-old Jason Cunliffe, who plays for the Bank of Guam. I'm not kidding. Cunliffe has scored the majority of his goals against island teams, but funnily enough, he did score against Singapore in 2015. That all said, Guam is the second worst Asian nation going into this round. Next, there's Yemen versus Sri Lanka. Yemen haven't played at home since 2012 due to a civil war which has practically destroyed all football infrastructure in the country. Because of this, the domestic league has played just 2 seasons in the last 7 years, and most clubs are begging for donations. The situation got so bad that national team players and staff had to escape by boat during the 2018 World Cup qualifying campaign. But at one point in history, Yemen found itself on the rise after reunification and nearly qualified for the final round of Asian World Cup qualifiers in 2002. Nicknamed the Golden Army, Sri Lanka's best period came during the late 90s when they won their first and only SAFF championship. Fast forward to now, however, they are the worst ranked Asian nation in the world. However, it should be mentioned that Sri Lanka's squad is filled to the brim with dual nationals, a lot of which have just received their first call-up. I don't know how this will play out, but I am interested. The 5th matchup is between Myanmar and Macau, and this match has already happened before in June, I believe, when Myanmar won 1-0. But the last 3 years have truly been a roller coaster for Myanmar's football team. Back in 2020, multiple key players refused to represent the nation, citing the military coup against the government. This resulted in some awful performances throughout 2021 and 2022, including a 10-0 loss to Japan and an 8-0 loss to Kyrgyzstan. However, 2023 has seen the return of Myanmar stars, and the national team were finally able to grab their first win in over 2 years. Macau has never made it past the first round. Not even once. Their best chance came in World Cup 2022 qualifiers when they had a 1-0 advantage against Sri Lanka after the first leg, but the FA forfeited due to safety issues. Most of the national team play their club football for either Monte Carlo, Benfica de Macau, or Chao Pak-Kei, whose logo looks more like a gas station. So, while I was editing this video, I came across these Chao Pak-Kei branded fake Jordans. The first round also sees a rematch between Cambodia and Pakistan. In 2022 World Cup qualifiers, it was Cambodia that prevailed 4-1 on aggregate. They hope to replicate a similar result with youngster Siang Chantia, who plays in the Qatari 2nd Division. Cambodia's history is mostly dry except for a 4th place finish in the 1972 Asian Cup when they were called the Khmer Republic. Much like Cambodia, Pakistan's achievements go all the way back to the mid-20th century. Throughout the early 60s to 70s, Pakistan was actually good enough to beat some of Asia's superpowers, and that era was spearheaded by Pakistani Pele himself, Abdul Ghaffur Majna. Nowadays though, Pakistan would be lucky enough to beat Gibraltar. Right now they're on a 12-game losing streak and haven't won in the last 5 years. We also have Taiwan versus Timor-Leste. Taiwan were very successful during Asian football's infancy. 2 gold medals in the Asian Games and a podium finish in the 1960 Asian Cup. They are far from that now, however manager Gary White has been leading the nation in the right direction. His first tenure in 2017 saw Taiwan reach its highest ever FIFA ranking. He left in 2018 but is now back after some shambolic managers in the past. One player to look out for is Swedish-born Taiwanese player Miguel Sandberg. He represented the national team at youth level in the 2018 U19 Asian Cup, where he was the youngest in the squad. Timor-Leste were only recognized by FIFA in 2005 and didn't win a match until 2012 when they beat Cambodia. God knows how legit that win was though, because in 2016, the federation was charged for using forged and falsified documents to play ineligible footballers. A year later, they were actually banned from qualifying for the 2023 Asian Cup.
Leave me alone, please.
Hiding in the shadows. Hiding from who you truly are.
Now there's always an odd one out in this round of qualifiers, and I think this time around it's Indonesia. They play Brunei, and the most recent meeting between the two saw Indonesia win 7-0. The national team is only getting better, mind you. Along with promising players like Elkan Bagat and the social media player, there's a lot of excitement surrounding 19-year-old Marcelino Ferdinand, who plays in the Belgian 2nd Division. Under the guidance of former South Korean manager Shin Tae-yong, Indonesia's future looks illuminating. So maybe now they'll finally win an AFF championship. Brunei has never made it past the first round, and I can assure you it's definitely not happening this year. That being said, there has been massive improvements being made to the national team. Massive in the eyes of Bruneians. After a 26-year drought, the Wasps qualified for the most recent AFF championship. Sure, they would lose every group stage game by 5 goals, but hey, you know, progress. Also, for you FNG fans, this country has Faik Bokia, the richest footballer in the world. The 9th matchup we have is Hong Kong versus Bhutan. During Asia's early days, Hong Kong was one of the top teams. They finished 3rd in the inaugural Asian Cup and then 4th in the 1964 edition. However, they would not qualify for another Asian Cup until this year. And understandably so, Hong Kong's most famous victory was a 2-1 upset win against China in 1986 World Cup qualifying. Bhutan was once considered consistently the worst team based on FIFA ranking. However, in their first attempt at World Cup qualifiers in 2015, they shocked Sri Lanka to rise up to 163rd in the world. Lastly, we have Nepal versus Laos. Throughout its history, Nepalese football has been held back due to a lack of facilities. However, recently, it appears the national team might be on a bit of a rise. Since 2011, Nepal has managed 3 semi-final finishes and 1 runners-up in the SAFF Championship. One player behind the successes is Nepal's most capped player, goalkeeper Kiran Chemchong. He plays his football in India, as does 25-year-old Anyan Bista, who is 3rd in Nepal's all-time leading scorers. Laos' all-time leading scorer is Sukhofon Vongchingkam, and he's active as well. The 31-year-old has 15 goals for his national team. He's also 5'1". Look at this picture. This guy towers over him. Watch out for 23-year-old midfielder Michael Vang as well. He's the first ever Hmong professional footballer in the US. When it comes to history, yeah, I mean, Laos doesn't really have that much. Except for maybe some match-fixing scandals, but that's only because the federation doesn't pay its players enough. We'll start with Afghanistan versus Mongolia, and the Afghans came out on top after scoring a single goal. Shout out this guy, by the way. He's very on top of posting highlights of anything Afghanistan national team related. However, right before the second half, news came out that the majority of Afghanistan's players players revolted against their head coach Abdullah Al-Matairi. The players believed that the national team's level was much higher than the coach and that his tactics and drills were not up to par. As a result, the coach was nowhere to be seen during training sessions before the second leg. But then, Al-Matairi reappeared from the shadows with less than an hour before the match to tell the organizer to announce the game as a 3-0 forfeit in favor of Mongolia. All because his players didn't accept him. Thankfully, the second leg still commenced, just without the manager, and Afghanistan would score in the 70th minute to win 2-0 on aggregate and advance to the second round. And after the game, Abdullah Al-Mutairi was sacked. Meanwhile, over in Southeast Asia, Myanmar obliterated Macau 5-1 at home in the first leg. The second leg played out a 0-0 draw, so Myanmar advanced to the next round. Another tie that saw total annihilation happened in Jakarta, where Indonesia slapped around the Bruneians and won 6-0 in the first leg. No mercy was given in the second leg by the Indonesians, who again scored 6 past the Bruneians to win 12-0 on aggregate. In Singapore, the Lions scored twice early on through Christopher James van Huysen and Jacob Mahler. Believe it or not, these guys are not naturalized. However, Guam found a lifeline in the 90th minute thanks to a fantastic Jason Cunliffe free kick. My guy, you are 2-1 down. There is no need for all of this. Singapore had the final say, however, as they just narrowly won in Guam to advance to the next round. Taiwan started their first leg against Timor-Leste with a goal that somehow wasn't called offside. Either way, the Taiwanese went on to score 3 more and win the first leg in comfortable fashion. The second leg would be played in Timor-Leste. Actually, no. It would be played instead in Taiwan again. Cambodia vs Pakistan was the match I was looking most forward to, and it did not disappoint. The two teams played out an exciting first leg, and near the end, Pakistan were practically holding on for dear life. In the end, though, the match finished 0-0, which set up Pakistan really well for the return leg, especially as the national team would be playing in Pakistan for the first time since 2015. After a few close chances from Cambodia and Yuthai Ogawa thinking he's Jordan Poole, Pakistan started finding some rhythm early in the second half, and in the 68th minute, 19-year-old Harun Hamid scored the winner. This goal broke Pakistan's 13-game winless streak and earned the nation its first ever win in a World Cup qualifier. Entering this round, Pakistan were the 3rd worst Asian nation and were ranked 201st in the world. But now, they're on to the next round. Another tie that was pretty solid was the Maldives versus Bangladesh. The first leg saw an entertaining end-to-end spectacle, but also some of the worst finishing I have ever seen. The first goal wasn't seen until the 87th minute when the Maldives took advantage of a Bangladeshi error. However, Bangladesh responded immediately with an away goal in the 2nd minute of stoppage time. Then in their backyard, they scored early on to take a 2-1 lead on aggregate. However, it was now the Maldives' turn to reply as Isam Ibrahim makes it level. But then early in the second half, Bangladesh retake the lead and would go on to win 3-2 on aggregate. Hong Kong took care of business against Bhutan, and 19-year-old Michael Udabuluzor, born in the HK, scored a brace in just his second cap. Bhutan has come a long way though, and it was pretty evident when they just came short of making a comeback at home. Okay, what other games am I missing here? Oh yeah, Yemen, Sri Lanka. Yemen in the first leg straight up cooked Sri Lanka in 3 different styles like this was some kind of episode of Epicurious. Every Yemeni goal in that first leg could have easily been put on a highlight reel. Anyways, Yemen would go on to defeat Sri Lanka's team of dual nationals 4-1 on aggregate. Lastly, there was Laos versus Nepal. Another super interesting tie to watch, but it was marred by awful, and I mean awful officiating. Either way, 33 minutes played, Bunfachan Bungkong takes a nice touch, enters the box, whoop, and puts the finishing touch. But then in the second half, Anyan Bista finds the equalizer for the Nepalese, and the game ends 1-1 with Laos having the advantage on away goals. That advantage diminished, however, in the second leg when Manish Dangi scored the only goal of the match to send Nepal to the second round. So, a quick rundown of all the teams moving on to the next round. Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Singapore, Yemen, Myanmar, Pakistan, Taiwan, Indonesia, Hong Kong, and finally, Nepal. Alright, now to quickly talk about Vietnam. On second thought, let's not do that. If it isn't our favorite region, South America. And already we get some antics as Colombian keeper Camilo Vargas makes a dumb decision just 7 minutes in. Little later into the match though, James Rodriguez takes a touch with one foot and bangs it with the other. It is simply football heritage for James Rodriguez to score an absolute beauty against Uruguay. But Bielsa's men do not take long to respond, and Matias Oliveira makes it level right before the end of the half. However, Los Cafeteros get off to a fiery start in the second half, and Mateus Uribe cafe serves some fresh Colombian brew. Luis Diaz now has a chance to steal the deal, but don't forget he is Colombian, which means it simply just isn't that easy for him. Colombia continued to hound the Uruguayans, but it appears they've reverted back to 2022 finishing. And here comes the Flying Vargas, caught in no man's land again. With that challenge, not only were Uruguay awarded a penalty, but we now have our third red card of the campaign. Darwizi converts, the game ends 2-all, and Colombia completely bottle what should have easily been a victory. In a battle at the bottom, Ecuador's 16-year-old Kendry Pais becomes the youngest scorer in a CONMEBOL qualifier. But you can never underestimate Bolivia in La Paz as Rodrigo Romalo stuns the Ecuadorians, and finally, after so much suffering to start this hellscape of a campaign, Bolivians can rejoice. Never mind. This team can't defend at all. Argentina, through an early goal from Nicolas Otamendi, was enough to see the Albiceleste continue their perfect run. In that match, however, footage showed Paraguayan Antonio Sanabria spitting towards Lionel Messi. And when asked about the spitting incident, Messi turned menace mode on overdrive and simply said, "I don't even know who he is."
I don't even know who you are.
Chile shined with a 2-0 win against Peru, a great result for them in the age-old rivalry, while Peruvian fans continued to dwindle down into endless misery. Finally, to cap off match day 3, we had Brazil versus Venezuela. After struggling to get anything going, Brazil opened the score in the 50th minute through Arsenal's own Gabriel. But then, in the 85th minute, Venezuela's Jefferson Savarino sends a ball into the box and Eduard Bello scores an absolutely spectacular goal. With that stroke of genius, the Venezuelans continue to shock the world as they grab a massive point away against Brazil. This is also the first time Venezuela has gotten a result against Brazil in 14 years. Venezuelan fans, jubilant, mano tengo fe. Brazilian fans, however, were far from happy. So much so that after the game, Neymar was pelted by a bag of popcorn. Venezuela continued their good form into their last match of the window, winning 3-0 at home against Chile. This match also saw the fourth red card of the campaign. Chile's Marcelino Nunez initially got a yellow for a bad challenge, but then he put his finger on the ref not once, but twice, prompting a second yellow. Paraguay finally grabbed their first win of their qualification campaign after defeating Bolivia. This now meant Peru were the only team to have not scored yet. The battle of the flags between Ecuador and Colombia commenced in Ecuador later on, and the first half was a gritty and entertaining battle. Then into the second half, Colombia win a penalty, but Moises Ramirez comes up big. Los Cafeteros do manage to put the ball in the net just 5 minutes later, but unfortunately, it was offside. So after all that, the match would end as a thrilling 0-0 as both teams leave with 1 point each. Not to claim that I actually knew what I was talking about, but you Brazilian fans remember when you got mad at me for not giving Diniz any respect? In their last game of the month, the Brazilians conceded a goal from Darwin Nunez in the 42nd minute. Things then went from bad to worse when just 7 minutes later, Neymar goes off injured, and seeing how he was crying, it's not looking good. So that meant the following 45 minutes would consist of Diniz terrorist ball and no Neymar. And this resulted in Brazil getting off just one more shot. Just one, while Uruguay, with less possession, finished off the game thanks to a goal from Nicolas de la Cruz. Once more, Bielsa's men are grabbing great results and are only getting better, it looks like. Finally, there was Argentina versus Peru, and Lionel Messi would score his first goals against Peru in his entire career, while once again Peru failed to not only win a qualifier, but also score a goal, as Juan Reynoso produces yet another disappointing performance. One thing I should have mentioned in the preview was that Reynoso called up exciting talent Oliver Son to the national team this month, and didn't even include him in the 23-man squad. Fans are obviously not very happy, and to show you one example, I was mentioned in a tweet that simply asked, "Maxwell, can you read in your video, Reynoso conche tu madre?" So at the end of October, this is the table now. Argentina are already running away with the lead with 4 wins in 4 games. Then there's a tie on points between Uruguay, Brazil, and Venezuela. Uruguay and Venezuela will be more than happy about this window as they both grabbed 4 points each. Colombia sit 5th, just behind them with 6 points. A lot of missed opportunities against top opponents, but it definitely could have been worse. Ecuador acquired 4 points this month, and with it, they jump into the last automatic qualification spots. Just behind them is Paraguay, who hold on to the playoff spot while Chile lurks ever so closely in the back. While it certainly wasn't the best of windows, both teams will be happy to finally get their first victories of the campaign. Peruvians, you may be suffering from no identity under Reynoso, but at least you still have a point. And Bolivians, you might be more miserable than your average resident in West Virginia, but at least you've scored more goals than Peru. We'll start with the Confederation of Chaos, CONMEBOL. Before the November window, Argentina had a perfect record and were top of the table. To start though, we'll talk about Bolivia, who at this point were bottom of the table. After another winless month, the Bolivian FA kicked head coach Gustavo Costas to the curb. Replacing him was Antonio Carlos Zago, and he could not have started his tenure better. Zago led Bolivia to a 2-0 win at home against Peru. Over in Venezuela, La Vinotinto and Ecuador could only play out a goalless draw. Brazil, hoping to get back up from their stumbles last month, used some Vinny sauce and finished it with a Martinelli garnish early against Colombia. But don't worry folks, the funny isn't over just yet. Colombia went on to equalize through Luis Diaz in the 75th minute, and then 4 minutes later Diaz gave Colombia their first ever win versus Brazil in a World Cup qualifier. Argentina vs Uruguay happened soon after, and the whole of South America got to witness vintage Bielsa stun the world champions 2-0. And don't you worry, that red card streak is still ongoing. Over in Santiago, 2 players got red cards in a 0-0 draw between Chile and Paraguay. In the next match day, Colombia grabbed 6 of 6 points for the month, a massive window for them. Ecuador earned themselves a 1-0 win as well thanks to longtime veteran Angel Mena. Uruguay continued their fantastic form with a 3-0 victory against the Sea Level Merchants. It should be mentioned, by the way, Darwizi is currently the top scorer in South American qualifiers. Talking about another clinical striker, this was Bolivia's Marcelo Moreno's last game as he announced his retirement from the national team. Brazil vs Argentina, like always, was highly anticipated months in advance. This matchup in particular was extra special as both teams wanted to make a statement. Could the reigning champions display their superiority against their biggest rivals? Or could the Brazilians spoil the party and keep people from remembering that despite not winning a World Cup in 20 plus years, Brazil is constantly one of the favorites? We did not have to wait long for the action to start. In fact, it started before the whistle even blew, because over in the stands, there were brawls happening between Argentinian and Brazilian fans. As a result, the game was postponed, and players on both teams watched in horror, scared for families and children who could have been caught in the crossfire. Oh, also, once more, police showing their galaxy brain IQ out here. Yeah guys, let's beat the people fighting each other. That totally will calm the situation down. Moron. The game finally took place, however, after 30 minutes, and Argentina would go on to win with an Otamendi header. Oh, also, we can thank Joe Linton for extending the red card streak. But this was not only Argentina's first ever World Cup qualifier victory on Brazilian soil. In fact, this was the first time ever Brazil had lost a qualifier at home. And forget that World Cup drought conversation, because Brazil are currently on a 4-game winless streak in qualifiers and haven't won since September. That last win was against Peru, and speaking of them, after 5 straight scoreless games, the Peruvians finally scored a goal. However, into the second half, the Peruvians invited Venezuela back into the game, they found the equalizer, and the misery continues for Peru. But don't lose hope just yet, Peruvians, because after yet another awful month, Juan Reynoso has finally resigned. Rejoice, Peruvians. I don't know who's coming up next, but surely they can score more than 1 goal in 6 games. Now looking at the table, Argentina are still in the lead, but Uruguay with their 2 wins this month have closed the gap to just 2 points. Colombia also had a perfect window, and this sees them jump into 3rd. Venezuela, despite earning just 2 points, still maintained 4th, while Ecuador continue to slowly make their way up the table. 4 points in November sees them go up 1 position. Brazil continue to fall like a rock. They went from 3rd at the beginning of November to 6th, and their defense has been truly abysmal so far. Only Peru and Bolivia have conceded more goals than the Brazilians.
It will never happen. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever.
And just hanging in the playoff spot is Paraguay, who earned just 1 point this window. Also, for once, we can say something slightly positive about Bolivia because they are no longer at the bottom of the table. Into Asia, and the second round of qualifiers is ready to commence. The second round format is pretty simple. Firstly, those who advance from the first round will now join everyone else in the second round. But talking about this round, there are 9 groups with 4 teams each. Teams will play their group opponents both at home and away, and after the end of this round, the top 2 will advance to the 3rd round. In Group A, we have Qatar, India, Kuwait, and Afghanistan. Imagine putting so much work into bribing FIFA and generating a record number of verbal gymnastics to poorly hide your awful working conditions and human rights abuses. And in the end, your nation crashes out of the groups with 0 points. Well, that's exactly what happened to Qatar, who made history becoming the only World Cup host to earn not even 1 point. Now, when this team isn't beating up on weaker Asian opponents, they're losing to the likes of Haiti, Panama, even Kenya. Maxwell, don't you think you're being a little biased? Of course I am. these frauds. India has managed to qualify for one World Cup, and that was back in 1950, but they withdrew from participating despite FIFA offering to pay for the team's travel expenses. Many speculated India's withdrawal was because of the fact they couldn't play barefoot. But that's a myth. It more so had to do with simply the fact that India valued the Olympics more than the World Cup. However, since that 1950 feat, India hasn't qualified for the World Cup since. But on a positive, nowadays you can't talk about Indian football without mentioning its star of hope, Sunil Chhetri. The 39-year-old striker has scored 93 goals for his country, which puts him amongst the likes of Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo in all-time leading international scores. Kuwait has one World Cup appearance from back in 1982, and even though they finished bottom of their group, they managed a historic draw with Czechoslovakia. Something even more impressive was when they were ranked 24th in the world in 1998. Unfortunately, it's been a slippery slope towards rock bottom in the last decade and more, as Kuwait's national team has been plagued by suspensions and inactivity. Between 2007 and 2017, the federation has been suspended 3 times, and this inactivity saw the nation drop all the way down to 189th in the world. They even missed out on World Cup 2018 qualifiers due to inactivity. Times are changing though. The national team is actually active again, and they're starting to go through a bit of a rebuild. Not to mention, in their last qualification campaign, they managed to finish runners-up in their second round group that consisted of Australia and Jordan. Over in Group B, we have Japan, Syria, North Korea, and Myanmar. A bit politically charged, as you can see. Japan, since the agony of Doha in 1993, has qualified for every World Cup, but since then, they've suffered another type of agony in the tournament itself. In 6 World Cup appearances, Japan has fallen short of the quarterfinals on numerous occasions. 2018 was probably the most painful when they squandered a 2-0 lead against Belgium and lost 3-2. 2022 was quite heartbreaking as well, when Japan practically invited Croatia back into the game and ended up losing on penalties after initially being 1-0 up at the half. But with every moment of suffering has been iconic instances of brilliance. 2022, for example, saw Japan's entertaining technical football take down European giants like Germany and Spain in the most dramatic ways possible. Victories like these have made Japan the model for development and success in Asia, and the national team is currently on a historic winning streak, and there seems to be no sign of stopping them. Syria's national team hasn't played in the nation's capital of Damascus since 2010 due to the ongoing war in the country, which makes their 2018 World Cup qualification campaign that much more inspirational. Syria finished 3rd in their 3rd round group, which consisted of giants like Iran, South Korea, China, and Qatar. They then had a 2-legged playoff against Australia to determine who would move on to the intercontinental playoffs. In the first leg, Australia took an early lead. However, Syria's star striker Omar Al-Somah converted a penalty. Al-Somah then scored 6 minutes into the second leg to give Syria the advantage on aggregate. Unfortunately, the Syrians couldn't hold on to their lead, and Australia would go on to win on aggregates in extra time. When you think of the North Korean national team, you think of 2 things. The 2014 World Cup, where they beat Japan 7-0 and then won the tournament by beating Brazil 2-1. And Han Kwang-song, the young North Korean striker whose promising career was derailed by sanctions against his home country. The man has been missing from football for at least 3 years now. North Korea has been to 2 World Cups, both famous for reasons opposite of one another. In one of the biggest upsets in World Cup history, North Korea defeated Italy in 1966 to advance to the quarterfinals. And then there was the 2010 World Cup, where after holding their own against Brazil in a 2-1 loss, the country decided to broadcast the team's next game against Portugal, where they got ass-blasted 7-0. Over in Group C, we have 2 East Asian nations in South Korea and China, and then 2 Southeast Asian nations in Thailand and Singapore. South Korea has historically been one of the best nations in Asia, and since 1986, they've qualified for every World Cup. Of course, their best performance came in 2002 when they co-hosted the tournament alongside Japan. South Korea, in one of the greatest showings of sportsmanship, produced stunner after stunner in the knockouts to finish 4th place. Fun fact, by the way, Papa Park Hang-seo was the team's assistant coach at the time. The South Koreans haven't been able to replicate that same feat since, but have put together some decent World Cup runs. 2022 in particular was pretty special when the Taeguk Warriors scored a last-minute winner against Portugal to advance to the round of 16. China have 1 World Cup appearance back in 2002 where they not only lost all their games, but also didn't score a single goal. That said, China were still a pretty solid team in Asia throughout the early 2000s. 4th place in the 2000 Asian Cup, and then in 2004 they finished runners-up. Unfortunately, a failed plan to become one of the best Asian nations by 2030 and the best nation in the world by 2050 has tarnished the entirety of Chinese football history. What was the plan in question? Give players from Europe ungodly amounts of money to play in the Chinese Super League, also naturalize random Brazilians after 1 year. How that was legal, I have no idea. Oh, what's that? Youth development, you say? Don't be silly. To everyone's surprise, this whole plan blew up in China's face, and now they're actually in a worse spot than they were when they were declining in 2016. On a positive though, it seems like the national team is ditching its naturalized Brazilians for actual Chinese talent. Thailand are the kings of the Rice Balkans, or better known as Southeast Asia. The War Elephants have also made it to the final round of World Cup qualifiers twice. However, in those two appearances, they failed to grab a single win, which really goes to show how far Southeast Asian nations are from the elite Asian teams. Thailand has been making efforts to play better competition to gain experience, however. In October, they played Estonia and Georgia. Thais will want to forget what happened in Georgia though. Group D consists of Oman, Kyrgyzstan, 007, and Taiwan. Oman has never qualified for the World Cup, but you can never take them lightly in the qualifiers. In their 2018 and 2022 campaigns, the Omanis were just within 1 point of the 4th round playoff. They also finished 3rd in the Central Asian Football Association Nations Cup, which consists of challenging opponents like Iran and Uzbekistan. And right at the beginning of the year, Oman were heartbroken in extra time by Iraq in the Gulf Cup. With every shortcoming, however, the relatively young squad continues to grow even stronger. Originally part of the Soviet Union national team, Kyrgyzstan gained independence in 1991 and joined AFC 3 years later. Kyrgyzstan has never made it past the 2nd round of qualifiers, but they are showing signs of improvement. The national team made its debut in the Asian Cup back in 2019 and reached the round of 16. The White Falcons have once again qualified for the tournament happening next year. The country's top domestic league is the Kyrgyz Premier League, whose logo looks like a rejected Watford badge. 007 Malaysia used to be a pretty solid team throughout the 1970s and 1980s. They never qualified for a World Cup, but they did make appearances in the Asian Cup. However, a bribery scandal wrecked the football scene, and Malaysia has not been the same since. 2010 gave the nation a glimpse of hope when a team of mostly U23 players won the AFF Championship. However, nothing ever came of it besides the Milo Merchants' worst ever loss in 2015 against the UAE, where they conceded 10 goals. But since the appointment of Kim Pan-gon, who looks like that one asshole from Squid Game, Malaysia are seeing a bit of a resurgence. Just last year, Malaysia qualified for the upcoming Asian Cup. It's the first time they've qualified on merits in 42 years. Group E is a very interesting one. We got Iran, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Hong Kong. Iran has been consistently one of the best Asian nations in the last 50 plus years. They've qualified for 6 World Cups, with their best stretch coming in the last decade, with the Iranians qualifying for the last 3. Ironically enough though, this last decade has probably been the most painful, just because of how many times Iran has come up short of reaching the knockouts. Whether that be Messi going clutch, referees being awful in other games, or even Pulisic nutsack. And time is running out on this golden generation. Most of Iran's players right now are closing in on age 30. This could open an opportunity for the next generation, however, especially after the U17 team stunned Brazil in the most recent U17 World Cup. Uzbekistan, like many underrated Asian nations, have come painstakingly close to World Cup qualification on a couple of occasions. 2014's campaign was probably the hardest pill to swallow for the Uzbeks when they lost on penalties to Jordan in the 4th round playoff. In my eyes, Uzbekistan is always a team you gotta look out for. They're just that permanent dark horse. A lot of that kind of has to do with the fact that they have that fusion of Europe and Asia in their players. You know, they're pretty big. The team just won't ever roll over and die for anyone, and this has been the case since their golden era in the 2000s. 2022 was a bit of a disappointment, with Uzbekistan not making it to the final round of qualifiers for the first time since they joined AFC. However, their current manager has a 61% winning percentage since 2021, so expect the Uzbeks to bounce back this campaign. Turkmenistan, you probably affiliate this country with their former insane leader, whose name I will not bother pronouncing. But you probably don't know anything about their football, and I wouldn't really blame you. The U23s did reach the quarterfinals in the U23 Asian Cup after advancing out of a group consisting of Uzbekistan, Iran, and Qatar, however, so maybe there's a bit of hope. Group F, we have Iraq, Vietnam, Philippines, and Indonesia. Iraq has 1 World Cup appearance under their belts, and that was back in 1996, where they lost every game but did score 1 goal. Since then, the national team has made numerous appearances in the final round, but that's as far as it goes. Iraq's best period came around the mid-2000s, when the nation was ranked at an all-time high 39th in the world in 2004. They then went on one of the greatest Cinderella runs in the 2007 Asian Cup and won the whole thing. Fast forward to now, and we might be seeing the best Iraqi team since that triumph of 2007. Vietnam made history back in the 2022 campaign, becoming the first Southeast Asian nation to win in the final round of qualifiers. But that was back during their Park Hang-seo era. Things are a little bit in question as the Vietnamese get used to their new head coach Philippe Troussier. Recently, Vietnam has been partaking in some more challenging friendlies, and while they've lost every single one of them, including Korea where they lost 6-0, you know, it's good experience. The question now is, though, can Troussier fill in the shoes of the great Papa Park? The Philippines, also known as Diaspora FC. For the longest time, basketball has not only been the preferred sport by fans, but even footballers. During the second half of the 20th century, the Filipino FA couldn't financially support their best players enough, which prompted numerous national team players to become basketball players. Then there was the rule mandated by Congress that only said 40% of the team could be Chinese Filipino or another foreign blood, and with the knowledge that sponsors and leagues were mostly funded by the Chinese Filipino community, you can kind of see how this probably didn't end well. The effects were detrimental to Filipino football, but in the last decade, there seems to be a bit of a renaissance happening. It all started with the Miracle of Hanoi, where the Philippines upsetted Vietnam in the 2010 AFF Championship. 9 years later, and the Philippines participated in their first ever Asian Cup. In Group G, we have Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Tajikistan, and Pakistan. Saudi Arabia has been to 6 World Cups, with their best performance being a round of 16 appearance in 1994. And in the most recent World Cup, the Saudis shocked eventual champions Argentina in their group opener. The team were gifted watches after the victory and then proceeded to disappear for the rest of the tournament. However, it doesn't look like Saudi Arabia are stopping anytime soon, as they actually just won the U23 Asian Cup last year, and they should be pretty strong contenders for the Asian Cup in January. The closest Jordan has ever come to qualifying for a World Cup was back in 2014. After beating Uzbekistan on penalties, they were absolutely battered by Uruguay in the Intercontinental playoffs. That was also the only time Jordan has ever reached the final round of qualifiers. Nowadays, they're in a stagnation similar to that of the British economy. Currently, though, there's one Jordanian playing European football, and that's Moussa Altamari of Montpellier. He only just moved to the French club this year and already has 3 goals in 9 appearances. Tajikistan, like its former USSR counterparts, didn't join AFC until the early 90s. They also have a badge that just goes unnecessarily hard. Anyways, the Sons of the Highlands have been making slow and steady progress. Last qualification campaign, the Tajiks put some decent performances and even earned themselves a spot into the Asian Cup next year. Group H has the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Yemen, and Nepal. The UAE has only ever made it to 1 World Cup. That was back in 1990, where they conceded 11 goals. But hey, they did have that one consolation goal against West Germany. In the 2000s, the UAE appointed high-profile managers like Carlos Queiroz, Roy Hodgson, and Dick Advocaat. Ironically enough, though, this was one of the worst periods for the Emiratis. Into the mid-2010s, the national team had a bit of a resurgence. They finished 3rd in the 2015 Asian Cup and then 4th in the following tournament. This was all followed up by the UAE's best chance at qualifying since 1990, where the team just missed out on the Intercontinental playoffs after losing to Australia in the 4th round playoff. We've been over this many times, but I still just cannot stress how painful the 2000s were for Bahrain. In 2006 World Cup qualifiers, Bahrain overcame Uzbekistan to have a chance at qualifying for the big dance through the Intercontinental playoffs. They were matched up against Trinidad and produced a 1-1 draw in the first leg. Unfortunately, in the return leg at home, the Bahrainis lost 1-0. Then in World Cup 2010 qualifiers, Bahrain overcame Saudi Arabia on away goals to once again advance to the Intercontinental playoffs. But once more, Bahrain conceded at home in the second leg. To New Zealand this time. Since then, the pain has been numbing for the #1 bottlers of Asia, and the national team hasn't made it to the final round of qualifiers since 2010. Finally, there's Group I, where we have Australia, Palestine, Lebanon, and Bangladesh. Australia has made every single World Cup since 2006, and the nation has a tendency to surprise many when it's least expected. In 2006, they were the 2nd lowest ranked nation, but that didn't stop the Socceroos from reaching the last 16. Then in 2022, Australia somehow prevailed over Peru in the Intercontinental playoffs. Then come the World Cup, everyone saw Australia as one of the worst teams going into the tournament. However, once more, everyone ate their words as Australia defeated both Tunisia and Denmark to reach the last 16 again. And they weren't too far off equalizing against Argentina in the last 16. There's no telling what Australia will be up to in this campaign, but watch out for wonder kids Grong Kuol and Nestori Irankunda. While Irankunda hasn't made a senior appearance, his clean strikes gained the attention of Bayern, who signed the 17-year-old for over €3 million. The Palestinian national team has never made it to the final round of World Cup qualifiers. They are making progress, however, as the nation qualified for its first ever Asian Cup in 2015, and they haven't missed a tournament since. since. With the upcoming qualifiers, it'll be difficult for the national team to focus on the game with everything going on, but perhaps like Ukraine, it could light a fire within this team. And finally, we have Lebanon. Lebanon has never qualified for the World Cup, but they've made final round appearances in 2014 and 2022. They actually had a pretty decent start in their last campaign, but ended up fizzling out and finishing bottom of their final round group. Considering though this is only a few decades after being ravaged by a civil war, it's admirable how much progress has been made, which also includes appearances in the 2019 Asian Cup and the upcoming one in January. In Group A, Qatar has gone off to a good start with 2 of 2 wins, one of which included an 8-1 destruction of Afghanistan. The landslide result was due to a boycott by 19 Afghani players citing corruption of the current federation president. Due to this, Afghanistan's squad was far weaker, and it didn't help they had a new coach having to deal with all this. Second place Kuwait and third place India are currently tied on points, with Kuwait having the advantage on goal difference. The two actually played each other in this window, where India grabbed a win away from home. Group B, as you'd expect, is currently being led by Japan, who continue their unbeaten run. They beat both their opponents 5-0. Once again, second and third are currently tied on points. North Korea have the advantage on goal difference, but Syria managed to beat them in this window. Also, remember Han Kwang-song? Well, after 3 years, he's reappeared from the shadows and even scored a goal against Myanmar. South Korea have started perfectly so far in Group C. They schooled Singapore and then took down China. Thailand and China are currently tied, with the Thais having the advantage on goal difference. And just like the last 2 groups, these two actually went up against each other. China prevailed with a 2-1 win in Bangkok, and during the match as well, a young Chinese kid was spotted doing homework at halftime. Over in Group D has the biggest shock of them all. 007 Malaysia has started brilliantly. In their opener, Malaysia found themselves 3-1 down against Kyrgyzstan, but then came back to win 4-3. Malaysia then ended the window with another 3 points against Taiwan. This group is Oman's for the taking, but it hasn't really been that way so far. They started with a solid win versus Taiwan, but then lost to Kyrgyzstan. Group E is setting itself up to be a close battle between Iran and Uzbekistan. After both won their opening fixtures, they played each other 4 days later. Iran took an early 2-0 lead, but that was cancelled out by Uzbekistan's rally back in the second half. Iraq has a solid grasp over Group F. They began by defeating the nation with the most annoying fans on the planet 5-1, and then a last-minute goal in Hanoi gave the Iraqis 6-6 points for November. Meanwhile, Vietnam are placed second after they scratched a win against the Philippines away from home. Saudi Arabia are clear of the pack in Group G. They beat Pakistan 4-0 and then Jordan 2-0 to earn 6 points. And after a draw with Jordan and a 6-1 win versus Pakistan, Tajikistan hold on to second. UAE have the lead in Group H, and already Ali Mabkut has 3 goals to his name in qualifiers. Meanwhile, Bahrain, seeking their first round appearance since 2010, hold on to second after beating Yemen. And finally in Group I, it's all Australia. They opened their qualifiers with a 7-0 drubbing of Bangladesh and followed it up with a 1-0 win against Palestine. In second place currently is Lebanon, who have drawn twice to begin their campaign. On to African qualifiers. Yes, you can stop bugging me about it because it's actually arrived finally. I mean, didn't I say when African qualifiers were starting in the first qualifier review? And you guys still kept asking? Like, come on, man. Come on. Use your head. However, for the first time ever in African qualifiers, there's no playoff round prior to the group phase. The first round of qualifiers will consist of 9 groups with 6 teams each, which means I have 54 more teams to preview. Kill me now. Just like Asia, the countries will play their group opponents both at home and away. And at the end of this round, each group winner will automatically qualify for the World Cup, while the 4 best second place finishers will advance to the playoff round. To start, we have Group A, which consists of Egypt, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, Sierra Leone, Ethiopia, and Djibouti. Egypt has made it to 2 World Cups back in 1990 and 2018. 2018 was supposed to be the exciting tournament back for the Egyptians, but it derailed very quickly. To start, Mo Salah was injured right before the tournament in the Champions League final, and then to make things worse, there was a whole dispute between him and the federation. And that was because Salah's likeness was being used on a plane with a rival telecommunications company. But the pain doesn't end there for our Egyptian king, because during a penalty shootout to determine who would be going to World Cup 2022, Salah was blinded by a swarm of lasers and missed his attempt. Egypt would go on to lose the shootout and miss out on the World Cup. And that was the year after Mo Salah and Egypt lost on penalties in the AFCON final. So the question now is, will Mo Salah ever catch a break? Just once. Back during 2014 World Cup qualifiers, Burkina Faso made it to the final rounds and defeated Algeria 3-2 in the first leg at home. Unfortunately, a single Algerian goal in the second leg was enough to send Burkina Faso packing. Burkina Faso has always seemed to be just one step away from greatness, aka qualifying for a World Cup. In the last 5 AFCONs, the Stallions have finished in the top 4 in 3. And the last World Cup qualification campaign, they were just 2 points below Algeria. It wasn't until the 2022 World Cup qualification campaign that Guinea-Bissau Senegal would actually advance out of the first round. This, along with 4 straight AFCON qualifications, gives fans some hope, albeit not much. Oh, also, there's this one player named Pele. The joke was funny back in 2015, trust me. Sierra Leone. Pretty sure Big Sean made a song that's named Sierra Leone. Anyways, back in the 2021 AFCON, Sierra Leone surprised everyone by holding reigning champions Algeria to a goalless draw. This was also Sierra Leone's first AFCON match in 25 years. Then the following match, Sierra Leone drew with Ivory Coast. Unfortunately, they failed to make it out of the group after losing to Equatorial Guinea. While Sierra Leone has had very little success in World Cup qualifiers, those results in the previous AFCON could give them some confidence coming into this World Cup qualification campaign. Oh, I did some digging, by the way, and I came across 2 interesting Sierra Leonean clubs: Anti-Drug Strikers FC and Mighty Blackpool. Which Ethiopian club are you? Defense Force SC, Ethiopian Coffee FC, or Ethiopian Insurance FC? Let me know in the comments. Mussolini's owners have never qualified for the World Cup. The closest they came was during 2014 qualifiers when Ethiopia reached the 3rd round playoffs, but then were walloped by Nigeria. Ethiopia was one of the best in Africa once upon a time. Between 1957 and 1968, the Ethiopians won 1 AFCON and finished in the podium twice. Nowadays, though, Ethiopians are simply happy just to qualify for the tournament. Djibouti only started attempting World Cup qualification back in 2002. But despite the size of the country and its tendency to withdraw due to financial issues, the national team has managed to advance past the first round in 2010 and 2022 qualifiers. Group B, we have Senegal, DR Congo, Mauritania, Togo, Sudan, and South Sudan. I'm sure that'll go well. Senegal has made it to 3 World Cups in the last 30 years. Their best finish came in 2002 when, after stunning reigning champions France, the Senegalese made it all the way to the quarterfinals. Fast forward to now, for the last 8 years under long-serving head coach Aliou Cisse, the Senegalese have been enjoying a golden era, but with many core players getting older, the youngsters will need to step in. DR Congo made 1 appearance in the World Cup, and that was back in 1974 when they were called Zaire. They lost every single game, didn't score a goal, and conceded 14 times. Nowadays, the national team holds numerous talented players, some that play in the Turkish League, the Premier League, Bundesliga, and Liga. Here's the issue though. The national team is hilariously unserious. In the playoffs of African qualifiers last year, the Congolese managed to draw with heavy favorites Morocco in the first leg. And before one of the biggest games in the country's history, players were seen eating massive amounts of food. They lost the second leg 4-1. Mauritania's national team played its first game in 1961, but they didn't win a game until 1980. So it probably shouldn't come to the shock of anyone that Mauritania has never qualified for a World Cup or even has come close. In fact, in 7 attempts, the national team has only ever won 2 times. But perhaps there is hope for Mauritania because they qualified for their first AFCON in 2019, and they've qualified for every since. Back in the mid-2000s, Togo was experiencing a golden generation and qualified for the 2006 World Cup. While the tournament was pretty underwhelming, this was just the beginning for Togo. However, the team failed to qualify for 2010, and that was followed by a team bus attack during the 2010 AFCON that killed multiple staff members and injured numerous players. Many footballers were left traumatized from the attack, and after the federation opted to withdraw, it meant a nightmarish end to Togo's best era. And signs for the near future don't look that great for the Sparrowhawks because they haven't qualified for the last 3 AFCONs. Believe it or not, Sudan used to be one of the most successful teams in Africa back in the day. With players like all-time leading scorer Nasser El-Din Abbas, the Sudanese won the African Cup of Nations in 1970. But since then, it's only been downhill for the national team. Due to the retirement of stars, civil wars plaguing the nation, and numerous political conflicts causing a depletion in football resources, Sudan has fallen far from the heights it once knew. South Sudan gained independence in 2011, and their federation joined CAF in 2012. So once again, it shouldn't come to any surprise that they have never qualified for a major tournament. In Group C, we have Nigeria, South Africa, Benin, Zimbabwe, Rwanda, and Lesotho. After failing to qualify in their first 6 attempts between 1970 and 1990, the Nigerians have qualified for 6 of 8 tournaments. Their best finish was in 1994 when the Super Eagles won a group consisting of a strong Bulgarian side and Maradona's Argentina. Nigeria then played Italy in the last 16 and were eliminated by a goal in extra time. In recent years, Nigeria has conjured up some of the most talented attacking players in the country, in the continent, hell, even the world. And yet somehow every coach in recent time has produced the football equivalent that of a boiled unseasoned chicken. Before we talk about South African football, I just want to show you guys this new badge they have. It's literally straight out of Football Manager. When you think about South Africa, you probably think of 2010, you know, Shabalala. you know, this. But I'm not even sure people are aware of the fact that South Africa have actually qualified for 2 other World Cups. 2002 in particular saw the South Africans just miss out on the knockouts due to a goal-scored tiebreaker. Going forward now, the national team has a decent core with an exciting attacking talent in Lyle Foster. Hopefully this time Bafana doesn't get f***ed over by Ghana again. Benin's closest shot at qualifying for the World Cup was back in 2010 when they finished 3 points behind Ghana. After that, Benin has qualified for only one major tournament, 2019 AFCON. In that tournament though, they reached the knockouts and then stunned Morocco in the last 16. Eventually the Cheetahs lost to Senegal in the quarters, but it was a great performance nonetheless. Too bad they never carried that success onward. But maybe there's hope in the shape of 18-year-old Khalid Jankpata. He's a forward currently in Everton's youth academy. Zimbabwe, the country that has blessed us with names like Knowledge Musona, Agent Sawu, and Marvelous Nakamba. Also, Zimbabwe has everyone's favorite African club, Chicken Inn FC. The closest Zimbabwe came to qualifying for a World Cup was back in 1994 when they were heartbroken by Cameroon, who beat them on the final day. In recent years, however, the national team has been suspended twice. Once in 2016 due to unpaid debts, which barred them from 2018 World Cup qualification, and more recently in 2022 due to government interference within the federation. I never really take this violation seriously because FIFA just kind of picks and chooses with this one. The team, however, was banned for the 2023 AFCON qualifiers, but they are still in the 2026 World Cup qualifier somehow. On a more positive note, 20-year-old Michael Ndiweni just made his debut for Newcastle. He was born in England but is of Zimbabwean descent. Rwanda has never qualified for the World Cup, but they did make one appearance in the 2004 AFCON. One player you should look out for is 18-year-old Hakim Sahabo. The midfielder is currently playing for Standard Liège's reserve team and has already made 4 caps for his country. Lesotho has never qualified for a major tournament since its beginnings in 1970. Honestly, there's not really much to say about the national team, so again, I did a little bit of digging. My findings? Lesotho Correctional Services FC. That's right, Prison FC. What's even funnier is the fact that this club has won 6 Lesotho Premier League titles. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll come across Arsenal FC. Group D has Cameroon, Cape Verde, Angola, Libya, Eswatini, and Mauritius. Cameroon is considered one of the most successful nations in African football. They've qualified for 8 World Cups and their best finish came in 1990. First, the indomitable Lions defeated reigning champions Argentina and then took down Romania's golden generation to win the group. In the knockouts, Roger Milla's 2 goals against Colombia sent the Cameroonians to the quarterfinals. The mid-2000s were another great time for Cameroon. This was like the Samuel Eto'o era. Now though, Cameroon is a shadow of its former self, but they did just recently beat Brazil in the World Cup. That was their first win in the World Cup since 2002. The list of footballers who could have played for Cape Verde is pretty interesting. You start with Nani, but then you have Patrick Vieira and Henrik Larsson to name a few. Instead though, the Blue Sharks have never qualified for the World Cup. The joint all-time leading scorer, Ryan Mendes, still actively plays though. With 15 goals and 69 caps, he hopes to be the difference maker. Angola in the mid-2000s were experiencing a bit of a golden generation, and as a result they qualified for the 2006 World Cup. Unfortunately, once the generation dried up in the 2010s, Angola has continued to slide down the world rankings. After 5 straight AFCON qualifications, the national team has only made 2 appearances since 2015. Libya has always been at a disadvantage compared to its North African counterparts due to constant political conflicts happening in the country. Most notably, there was the Libyan civil war in 2014, which resulted in the halting of their domestic league. So with that, there's really no reason to talk about their World Cup qualification record. However, their AFCON record is super interesting. They've only qualified for 3 tournaments, 2012, 2006, and most notably 1982 when they finished runners-up. Eswatini is a bit better. They've been attempting to qualify for the World Cup since 1994 and have a couple wins. 2018 in particular saw Eswatini take down Djibouti 8-1 on aggregate, but then they were eliminated by Nigeria. Over on the islands of Mauritius, the Dodos have made 8 attempts to qualify for the World Cup and have only ever won once. To be honest, that's about it for the Dodo Islands. In Group B, you have Morocco, Zambia, Congo, Tanzania, Niger, and Eritrea. World Cup 2022 gave us some incredible stories, and Morocco's Cinderella run was easily the best of the best. In a group with Belgium and Croatia, Morocco conquered and finished top. In the last 16, the Moroccans defeated the passing merchants on penalties. Then in the quarters, a towering and Nasiri header sent Morocco to the semis. It became the first African country to reach this stage of the World Cup. While the dream was rudely awoken by France and Croatia, the Moroccans proudly finished 4th. Zambia hasn't had much success in World Cup qualifiers. However, just 11 years ago, the Zambians produced one of the greatest upsets in African football. In the final of the 2012 AFCON, Zambia defeated Didier Drogba's Ivory Coast on penalties. The genius behind the feat was, of course, African football's own Hervé Renard, who dedicated the championship to the victims of the infamous plane crash of 1993 that took the lives of 30 people, including 18 players. However, since then, Zambia has been struggling to even qualify for the AFCON, let alone the World Cup. And with their performances in World Cup qualifiers getting worse over time, it's not really looking that great for the Zambians. The Republic of Congo back in 1997 had one more game to play against South Africa in World Cup qualifiers. Whoever came out on top of that match would be booking a ticket to the 1998 World Cup. In the end though, an early South African goal ended the hopes of Congo. Since then, Congo has struggled to replicate any of the magic of 1997, and they seem to only be getting worse. 2022 qualifiers was probably the worst example of it, as they went winless throughout the entire campaign. Tanzania, also known as African Wisconsin. Tanzania not only haven't qualified for the World Cup, but until 2019, the Taifa Stars hadn't qualified for a major tournament since 1980. Things do slightly seem to be going in the right direction, as Tanzania also qualified for the recent AFCON. By the way, Tanzania will be one of the 3 nations to host the AFCON in 2027. Niger has never qualified for the World Cup, never even come close. In fact, there's been times where financial troubles have caused the national team to withdraw from qualification. The team has made AFCON appearances, however, back in 2012 and 2013, where they finished second to last in both tournaments. Eritrea's federation decided to withdraw from qualifiers out of fear that its players would escape from the country, which is currently headed by a totalitarian dictator. The Eritrean government subjects its people to forced labor and conscription while limiting any freedom of speech or religion. Group F: Ivory Coast, Gabon, Kenya, Gambia, Burundi, and the Seychelles. Gervinho, Solomon Kalou, Yaya Toure, Didier Drogba, Seydou Doumbia if you want to really throw them in there. The mid-2000s to mid-2010s were a gift for our eyes. Between this period, Ivory Coast qualified for 3 straight World Cups. Although they never made it past the group phase, they always at least got 1 win in each tournament. However, after a 2015 AFCON title, the stars of the national team faded into retirement. No one has been able to pick up their slack, and as a result, Ivory Coast has failed to qualify for the last 2 World Cups. When you think of Gabon, you think of one player, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. If you're that one hipster that says Mario Lemina, shut the f*** up. When it comes to World Cup qualifiers, Gabon just doesn't have that extra gear to give them the advantage against the giants of Africa. However, in the last AFCON in 2021, Gabon reached the last 16, so maybe hope isn't all lost. Only 95% of it. Remember that time when Roman Molina reported the fact that the Kenyan FA had 16 different bank accounts? Well, I do. While that may be a bit overblown, it does kind of give you an idea of how shambolic the federation is. Back in 2004, the federation was suspended by FIFA. Then last year in February, the Kenyan FA was suspended for alleged misappropriation of funds. And then earlier this year, the federation suspended 16 footballers and coaches due to match-fixing allegations. This has resulted in the national team struggling for any kind of success. Kenya has never qualified for a World Cup, and their last AFCON appearance was back in 2019. They will be hosting the AFCON in 2027 with 2 other countries though. That aside though, the country holds my personal favorite football club in the continent. Kakamega Homeboys. Gambia has never qualified for the World Cup and has only ever made 1 appearance in the AFCON. That was in 2021, where they surprised many by reaching the quarterfinals. Forwards Moussa Barrow and Abli Jallow were crucial to that run and will be crucial once again if Gambia want to punch a ticket to North America. Burundi back in 1998 World Cup qualifiers should have been in the final round after beating Sierra Leone on aggregate. However, they withdrew not too soon after due to the civil war occurring in the country. Burundi has only made 1 appearance in the AFCON, and that was back in 2019. The national team lost all its games, conceded 4 goals, and scored none. The Seychelles may have a really cool looking flag and a relaxing song named after them by Masayoshi Takanaka. But when it comes to football, there's nothing. No appearances in the AFCON and not a single win in 7 attempts at World Cup qualification. Currently, the nation is ranked 199th in the world, and not too long ago, they were actually at an all-time low 202nd in the world. Group G: Algeria, Guinea, Uganda, Mozambique, Botswana, and Somalia. Algeria has qualified for 4 World Cups. 1982 was the first ever World Cup they qualified for, and in their opener, they produced one of the greatest upsets in the tournament's history by beating reigning champions West Germany. Algeria also beat Chile, but unfortunately they were over by a match-fixing scandal. 32 years later in 2014, the Algerians advanced out of their group for the first time ever. However, the Algerians have not qualified ever since, and this was despite Algeria going on a 35-game unbeaten streak between 2019 and 2022. Guinea has never been good enough to qualify for the World Cup, but they have a pretty decent record in the AFCON. In 2004 and 2008, the national team finished in the quarterfinals. This resulted in them being as high as 22nd in FIFA rankings. Guinea's current squad is filled with players putting in some good performances in their their respective leagues. The likes of Serhou Girassi, Isiaga Sila. You could also throw in star player Naby Keita, if he can stay healthy for more than 3 seconds, that is. Uganda during the early days of African football were pretty decent. In the 1962 AFCON, they finished 4th, and in the 1978 edition, they finished runners-up. Fast forward to now, though, the Ugandans haven't qualified for the last 2 AFCONs. But hey, at least they're guaranteed for 2027 as they host the AFCON with 2 other nations. Bet you don't know what the other 2 nations are. Uganda has no World Cups under their belts, and their current head coach is Paul Putt, a man very familiar with African football as he's managed Gambia, Burkina Faso, Kenya, Guinea, and Congo in the last 15 years. Oh yeah, also, there was that one time Uganda's domestic league went viral after they rewarded a player bread and yogurt as a Man of the Match award. Mozambique has one of the hardest looking flags in the world, but that hasn't helped them at all when it comes to World Cup qualification. The national team has qualified for a few AFCONs, however, they've never been able to escape the groups. Botswana, the country whose flag is being used by a lot of Man City fans on Twitter. Botswana has never qualified for the World Cup, but they do have one appearance in the AFCON. That was back in 2012 where they lost every game, but they did have a lead against Mali for 6 whole minutes. When I think of Somalian football, I think of the memes about how Somalis just don't pass the ball. While the Somali national team has never made it past the first round of qualifiers, there's a lot more to them, because there's a pretty massive Somali diaspora. One player that comes to many Somali minds is Taha Abdi Ali, a Swedish-born Somali. Just this year, he scored 6 goals and assisted 7 for Malmö. Easily, he's the most talented Somali, but he's not made a single cap for the country. Somalis, let me know if he's actually even interested in playing for the country, because I couldn't find anything there. Group H, we have Tunisia, Equatorial Guinea, Namibia, Malawi, Liberia, and Sao Tome and Principe. Tunisia has qualified for 5 World Cups and has never made it to the knockouts. In World Cup 2022, it felt like Tunisia's best chance to make the last 16, but their campaign never recovered after a shocking loss to Australia. The national team still holds the main core, but it is getting older. So sure, will Tunisia qualify out of a relatively easy group? Yeah. How far will they go from there? Not far. Equatorial Guinea has never qualified for a World Cup. However, with how small the landmass is, they have a pretty impressive record in the AFCON. They may only appear sporadically, but in all 3 appearances, they have reached the quarterfinals or farther. Equatorial's qualification campaign for World Cup 2022 was a huge step as well. Equatorial Guinea went from just collecting 1 win from each qualification campaign to winning 4, drawing 3, and losing just once. Namibia has no World Cup showings, but they did make 3 in the AFCON. They also just recently qualified for the 2023 AFCON. Now, going a little bit deeper, in the Namibian Premier League, there's a lot of very interesting club names. This includes Civics FC, Life Fighters FC, Mighty Gunners FC, UNAM FC, University of Namibia, and Young Brazilians FC. Quite like Namibia, Malawi has made it to 3 AFCON tournaments. 2023 was the most memorable when Malawi managed to reach the last 16, and in the knockouts they held a lead against favorites Morocco until the end of halftime. Malawi's all-time leading scorer is Kina Firi, who bagged 71 goals in 117 caps between 1973 and 1981. Liberia found themselves just 1 point away from qualifying for the 2002 World Cup. However, they've not been able to come anywhere close ever since. Liberia's all-time leading scorer is the legendary George Weah, one of the most decorated African footballers of all time. He was also once president of Liberia, and in 2020 he made this banger of a song. Also, how fitting for some Liberian footballers to be playing in both the US and Malaysia. Sao Tome and Principe has never qualified for a single major tournament. It probably hasn't helped them that the national team has gone on numerous hiatuses like their Michael Reeves. As Sao Tome and Principe squad is filled with a bunch of players of Portuguese descent, a lot of them play in the lower leagues in Portugal. One footballer in particular plays for a club called Oriental Dragon, a club that had the goal of signing Chinese players to improve the Chinese national team. Finally, we have Group I. We've gone over like 70 teams, man. But in Group I, we have Mali, Ghana, Madagascar, Central African Republic, Comoros, and Chad. A single comedic goal in the playoffs was what kept Mali from qualifying for the World Cup last year. As a result, the Malians will be on a revenge tour with their insane lineup of talented midfielders. Players like Yves Bissouma, Mohamed Kamara, and Cheikh Doucouré. Since 2006, Ghana has only missed 1 World Cup out of the last 5. They should have missed last year's tournament, but they lost a contest for who could play more uninspiring football against Nigeria. Oh, and also the officiating participating may have helped them in the previous round. Anyways, Ghana's best performance, of course, you all know this, was back in World Cup 2010. They reached the quarterfinals and could have become the first African semi-finalists had it not been for Luis Suarez's hands. This is a relatively easy group for Ghana, but you could just never tell these days with this team. Madagascar has only ever qualified for one tournament, the 2019 AFCON. And that one was super special for them, because Madagascar managed to shock everyone by winning a group consisting of Guinea and Nigeria. They then went on to defeat DR Congo to reach the quarterfinals. Madagascar have a good amount of footballers playing in France and Belgium, most notably Loic Lapoussin of Union Saint-Gilloise. The Central African Republic has never qualified for a single major tournament. They came close to qualifying for the 2023 AFCON, but bottled it in their last two games. One player you might recognize from the national team is Geoffrey Kondogbia. He played 5 times for France before switching in 2018. The Comoros qualified for their first AFCON in 2021 and surprised many by escaping a group consisting of Morocco, Gabon, and Ghana. When it comes to World Cup qualification, however, the team has never won in 4 campaigns. Things, though, could change, however, with the 2026 World Cup qualifiers. Having already shown they can beat opponents like Ghana, who are in their group, there's a pretty good chance for them here. And finally, we have the country with the funny meme name, Chad. Chad, though, has never lived up to its meme name, as they've never qualified for any major tournament. To make things worse, they've had to withdraw from multiple qualification campaigns due to financial issues or FIFA suspensions. Egypt has gone off to a perfect start in Group A. They defeated both Djibouti and Sierra Leone to earn 6 points for the window.
Oh yeah, in the Sierra Leone match, there was a bunch of fans that tried to attack Egyptian players. Totally normal stuff.
Meanwhile, a battle for second has already appeared between Burkina Faso and Guinea-Bissau. The two nations played each other to open their campaigns, but nothing could separate them. In Group B, Senegal and Sudan are tied on points, with Senegal having the advantage on goal difference. Senegal put 4 past South Sudan, but then could only grab a point from Togo away from home. Sudan also couldn't get more than a point from Togo, and then won at home versus DR Congo. Group C is giving us some early shockers. To be honest, I'm not really that shocked. Nigeria, who are favorites to qualify out of this group, have been severely underwhelming. Even more severely underwhelming than I thought they could be, because they drew against both Lesotho and Zimbabwe. In contrast to Nigeria, Lesotho don't have a single footballer playing in Europe. But enough about the football equivalent of divorced white motherfa. Currently, Rwanda hold the top spot, and this is no fluke as they defeated South Africa 2-0 at home. Speaking of which, South Africa are in second, just 1 point away from the Rwandans. In Group D, 3 nations find themselves tied on points. Cameroon are first thanks to goal difference. They started their campaign with a 3-0 win against Mauritius, but were only able to earn a draw versus Libya. Second place Cape Verde started their campaign with a draw, but then ended the November window with a 2-0 away win versus Eswatini. Finally, Libya, before their draw with Cameroon, earned a slim win versus Eswatini. Despite Morocco only playing 1 game in November, they still lead Group E. Tied on points with them are 3 other teams. Zambia earned 3 points off Congo, while Niger earned 3 points off Zambia, and Tanzania earned 3 points off Niger. Group F saw 2 nations have perfect starts so far. Current group leaders Ivory Coast defeated Seychelles 9-0 and then ended the window with a 2-0 win for Gambia. Meanwhile, second place Gabon started their campaign with 2 consecutive 2-1 wins. Over in Group G, everyone has points besides Somalia. Algeria currently lead as you'd expect thanks to wins against Somalia and Mozambique, while everyone else currently holds 3 points to their name. Group H is seeing a close battle between Tunisia and Equatorial Guinea, who both earned 6 points in November. Tunisia defeated Sao Tome and Principe and then later Malawi, while Equatorial Guinea started with a victory against Namibia and then followed that up with a win in Liberia. Group I is seeing something truly special. The f***ing Comoros are top of the group. And lo and behold, they did it by beating up on Ghana again.
It's my show now, baby!
Down in second place is Mali, who have 4 points to their name. They defeated Chad, but conceded an equalizer at home against the Central African Republic. Trailing just behind is Madagascar and Ghana with 3 points respectively. To begin the March review, we must start with CONCACAF, because in the first round we had 2 playoff ties, Anguilla versus Turks and Caicos, but more importantly, the highly anticipated US Virgin Islands versus the British Virgin Islands, the one and only Virgin Derby. And you might be asking yourself, Maxwell, why didn't you play for the US team? I will find where you live. In the first leg, it took 73 minutes for us to see the US Virgins take the lead. However, that was cancelled out by the British Virgins, who scored in the 2nd minute of stoppage time. In the second leg, refereed by Ken Pennyfeather, the 2 Virgin teams could not be separated after 120 minutes, so this derby would go down to a penalty shootout. The British team would go on to win and be rewarded with something Virgins all over the globe dream of achieving one day. That's right, Qualification to the second round of CONCACAF World Cup qualifiers. Oh yeah, I almost forgot there was the other game. Anguilla and Turks and Caicos played out in reverse. The first leg ended 0-0 and the second leg played out a 1-1 draw.
You filming again? Are you f***ing filming again?
Then in the penalty shootout, Anguilla prevailed, and by the way, they are second bottom in FIFA ranking, so this was a big step for the program. Now we move on to the other confederation that had qualifiers. Asia. Over in Group A, Asian Cup champions Qatar continue their perfect record with 2 wins against Kuwait. With these victories, they have already confirmed a spot in the third round. India and Afghanistan played each other twice in this window. In the first game, it was a 0-0 draw. 5 days later, we had the second game in India where the legendary Sunil Chetri scored an early penalty. Celebrations in Guwahati were short-lived, however, as Afghanistan came back late to win 2-1. Considering how many players the Afghan team were missing and how just months prior they were revolting against their manager, this is pretty impressive.
It is decent! Tell him, lad, it's decent!
Then you look at it on the other hand. Jesus Christ, India. You are f***ing shit. Usually I try to be nice, but you guys are just ass. And your federation is doing you no favors. I know despite all that, you're still gonna find a way to talk so much shit. You know, I wish I had this much delusion. Despite all I just said though, somehow India are second in this group after the March window. This window is just giving us everything. First we had the historic derby, now we have Japan versus North Korea. The first match went to Japan as Ao Tanaka scored the only goal of the game. Man, it wouldn't have been nice to have him at the Asian Cup, huh? We were supposed to see an even funnier version of this match in North Korea. However, we were once more denied greatness after North Korea decided against hosting the game, citing the rise in Strep A cases in Japan. FIFA went on to award Japan all 3 points, and with that win, Japan have locked themselves into the third round. On the other side of the group, Syria managed a draw with Myanmar away from home and then tore them to shreds 5 days later. They now sit comfortably in second, 4 points above third place North Korea. Now managed by caretaker and legendary striker Hwang Son-hong, South Korea took an early lead against Thailand through their talisman Son Heung-min. However, in the second half, the Thais responded with an impressive goal from youngster Sufanat Muanta, who has 7 goals in 19 caps already. The South Koreans would get the final laugh in Bangkok though, as they made some fresh pad kwa pao out of their opponents. Meanwhile, we had old money versus new money. That's a Crazy Rich Asians reference. China's last hope, Wu Lei, would put the team on his back for about the 80th time and scored 2 first-half goals. But then in the second half, Singapore, remembering they were playing China, took advantage of their opponent's god-awful defending and scored 2 of their own. China, however, did get the final say after beating Singapore 4-1 in the return fixture at home. Wu Lei scored 2 again, Wei Shi Hao got himself 1, and so did Fernandinho. Fernando. They're never beating the allegations, man. Looking at the table now, South Korea are first with 10 points, and just behind them is China, who play them in the next window. Thailand are just hanging in there, and I wouldn't count them out if they can redeem their poor showing in Bangkok back in November. I was gonna go to that game, by the way, but I had jet lag. Over in Group D, both Kyrgyzstan and Oman were fathering. Oman beat Malaysia twice, and Kyrgyzstan dug Taiwan its grave. After the March window, it's still pretty tight in this group, however. Kyrgyzstan and Oman are both tied on points and goal difference. They play each other on the final day. Meanwhile, Malaysia is still in contention, just 3 points behind the top 2. Group E is pretty similar. Uzbekistan beat Hong Kong 2-0 away and then 3-0 at home, while Iran stamped on Turkmenistan and Tehran and then edged past them 5 days later. After these results, both Iran and Uzbekistan are confirmed for the third round. Over in Group F, Iraq continue their perfect record at the top with 2 straight wins versus Diaspora FC. Over in the next group, after an incredible Cinderella run in the Asian Cup final, Jordan put a total of 10 goals past Pakistan throughout March. On the other hand, group leader Saudi Arabia had a double-header with Tajikistan, and they won the first game with an early goal from Salam Al-Dawsari. In the return fixture, the Saudis again took the lead. However, Tajikistan equalized with 10 minutes remaining to stay in the hunt for the third round. Looking at the group now, Saudi Arabia tops it with Jordan 3 points behind them. These two play each other on the final day, which could open a door of opportunity for Tajikistan, who will play Jordan away in the next window. Group H is pretty much decided as well. UAE collected 2 wins against Yemen, and with a little bit of historical revisionism, Bahrain could have probably claimed to have beat Nepal so bad that part of their flag fell off. After the March window, UAE have sealed a spot in the next round, while Bahrain is 1 point away from making it happen as well. So in my last video, I accidentally called Austria Australia twice. I don't know how I didn't catch it, because I go through my videos like 4 times in full in editing. Anyways though, just to pretend that this was all a intentional joke, we're gonna do the same thing but in reverse. Austria continued their perfect record in Group I with 2 wins against Lebanon. This also means the Austrians will be moving on to the next round. Palestine put together a really great window as well with 2 wins against Bangladesh. While the Palestinians weren't able to qualify for the next round in March, they will definitely seal the deal in June. And so that is your World Cup. Alright, fine, I'll fucking talk about it. Back over in group fuck me, Indonesia and Vietnam played each other twice. In the first match in Jakarta, the new-look Indonesians beat Vietnam with a single goal. Then in the return fixture, the Indonesians brutally penetrated the Vietnamese and won 3-0. Dear Indonesia, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Very wrong, in fact. I must admit, I was not familiar with your game. Not one bit. Vietnam is indeed finished. We are smaller than East Timor. CONCACAF now enters the second round of its qualifiers. It's a pretty simple format, 5 teams in each group and 2 advance to the final round. One half of this round was played in June, and the next will not happen until June 2025. But with every review, as there are new teams being added to the mix, let's go ahead and introduce a good majority of the CONCACAF nations. We start with Group A, which has Honduras, Antigua and Barbuda, Cuba, Bermuda, and Cayman Islands. Honduras made it to the World Cup 3 times. Their last appearance was in 2014, where they were grouped. In fact, they've never actually made it past the groups, but did come close back in 1982. In general, the 80s were a good period for Honduras as they won the Gold Cup back in 1981. They also shocked everyone by finishing 3rd in the 2001 Copa America. Nowadays, though, they've been awful. Their recent qualification campaign saw them go winless throughout the entire 3rd round, but they should be able to get out of this group at least. Antigua and Barbuda has never made it to the World Cup, and the closest they came was a CONCACAF qualifier 3rd round appearance in 2014. Their nickname is the Bena Boys, which refers to a specific genre of music based in Antigua and Barbuda. And this shit slaps. Cuba has been to 1 World Cup back in 1938, where they actually reached the quarterfinals after beating Romania on penalties. Unfortunately, it's been downhill ever since. Today, no one even really recognizes the feat of 1938. Nowadays, they just gamble on which players will defect to the US during the Gold Cup. And there's been a lot of players who have defected over the years, including Cuba's all-time top scorer, Lester More, who defected back in 2007. Do not reverse that name. Bermuda has never made it to a World Cup, and they've only ever reached the 2nd round of qualifiers. However, a pretty cool fact is that their first international game was away in Iceland in 1964. The nation's top scorer is Sean Goter. He scored 84 times for Man City back in the late 90s to early 2000s, and now he works at the club as a youth coach. Also, there's a club called Vasco da Gama Bermuda who have won the Bermuda Premier League 3 times. And they have no relation to the Brazilian club. The Cayman Islands, who I think ripped part of their federation's logo from FIFA's. The nation has never made it to the 2nd round of qualifiers ever. Until now, at least. And there's really not much to talk about this national team, but I did find their domestic league quite humorous. It consists of teams like Academy, Elite, Future, Sunset, and Latinos. Over to Group B, we have Costa Rica, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Kitts and Nevis, Grenada, and the Bahamas. Costa Rica has 6 appearances in the World Cup and featured in the most recent edition. Their best finish was 8th when they overcame a group of death and narrowly missed out on the semis due to a penalty shootout versus the Netherlands. 1 decade later, the generation behind that feat is history, and Costa Rica are moving toward the future with a younger core and well-respected manager. And so far, things have looked promising, with the nation recently drawing Brazil in the 2024 Copa America. If it isn't my favorite country in this region, Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad made 1 appearance in 2006 where they failed to make it out of the group. They did, however, draw with Sweden in their opening match, and also made history at the time as the smallest country to qualify for the World Cup. Also, we love creative football shirts here, and Trinidad a couple years ago released these absolute beauties.
I need it!
St. Kitts and Nevis, the team with my favorite nickname, the Sugar Boys. with a Z. They have never qualified for the World Cup, and the farthest they've gone in qualifiers is the 3rd round. However, just last year, St. Kitts and Nevis did recently qualify for their first ever Gold Cup. The country also has a club called Garden Hotspurs, which sounds like something from a Cal the Dragon TikTok. And one more thing. I did not watch St. Kitts and Nevis play a friendly on March 20th at 8:45 p.m. Grenada has not even come close to qualifying for the World Cup, but they have made 3 appearances in the Gold Cup, however. Grenada's national team, however, is most known for an infamous moment during the 1994 Caribbean Cup. In a game between Grenada and Barbados, Grenada had just scored to half the deficit versus Barbados. Barbados needed to win by 2 goals to advance to the final, and knowing that a golden goal was worth 2 points for whatever reason, they deliberately scored an own goal to force extra time. However, to avoid the golden goal situation, in the last few minutes, Grenada was trying to score in both goals with Barbados defending both goals. But unfortunately for Grenada, the game did go to extra time, and Barbados did end up getting their golden goal. Oh, also, there's a club in Grenada called Queen's Park Rangers. The Bahamas, more known for its common place for tourism than their national team. They have never qualified for the World Cup, but they are called the Baja Boys, with a Z, which I think is pretty cool. They also go by the nickname the Bahamian Slayers, which I also think is pretty cool. Now, we've already talked about how tourism is probably more popular than the national team. So is the beach football national team. The Bahamas even hosted the 2017 FIFA Beach World Cup. And even funnier, Leslie St. Fleur is both top scorer for the national team and the beach team. Over in Group C, we have Haiti, Curaçao, St. Lucia, Barbados, and Aruba. Haiti has 1 World Cup appearance under their belt. 1970 saw the Haitians miss out after losing a 3rd playoff game on a neutral ground. However, they redeemed themselves qualifying for the 1974 World Cup. Unfortunately though, Haiti was put in a group with Argentina, Italy, and Poland. Believe it or not, however, Haiti were once one of the strongest teams in the region back in the 70s. They even won the Gold Cup in 1973. However, the Haitians haven't seen the final round of World Cup qualifiers since 1982. But maybe this qualification campaign will change that. Since becoming an independent country in 2010, Curaçao has never qualified for the World Cup. But despite how young the country is, it's considered one of the better of the rest. They even made it all the way to the quarters of the 2019 Gold Cup. Their most capped player is fullback Cuco Martina, who I personally know as the guy who scored this unbelievable goal versus Arsenal. Curaçao also plays some of the oddest friendlies you'll ever see. Just last March, they beat Hull City 1-0 and then drew with Alanyaspor. And then back in 2022, they played Ajax. St. Lucia has never qualified and have never made it farther than the 2nd round of qualifiers. Their head coach is Stern John, who is not only Trinidad's all-time top scorer, but also CONCACAF's. Also, there's a club in St. Lucia called Platinum FC, and their logo looks, a bit familiar. Aruba has never qualified for the World Cup. However, they are home of River Plate Aruba, and you can get one of their jackets for just $50 USD on eBay. There's also SV Dakota. They've won the Aruban League 17 times. They caught my eye in particular because their logo features the Georgia Tech yellow jacket. Barbados has never qualified for the World Cup, but one time they shocked the entire world in 2002 qualifiers by beating Costa Rica 2-1. Their most notable player is Greg Goodridge. Goodridge was a fan favorite at Torquay United and also helped Bristol City promote to the 2nd division in 1998. He continued playing football back home until he retired in 2017 at the age of 47. Group D, we have Panama, Nicaragua, Guyana, Montserrat, and Belize. Panama have 1 appearance back in 2018 where they finished dead last. Still though, it was an incredible moment just qualifying for the tournament, as it was Roman Torres' last-minute winner versus Costa Rica, which had the whole country celebrating into the night. Los Canaleros missed out on 2022, but going forward, things look promising, because just recently they beat the US in the 2024 Copa America to advance to the knockouts. Panama also finished runners-up in the most recent Gold Cup. Nicaragua has never qualified for the World Cup, and never has been to the final round, but things could change with their relatively favorable group. Their all-time top scorer is Juan Barrera with 25. He's been active since 2009. And back in 2022, Nicaragua released this work of art as their 3rd shirt. Guyana has never qualified for the World Cup and has also never made it to the final round of qualifiers. But back in World Cup 2014 qualification, they did manage to advance to the 3rd round after winning a group that had Trinidad in it. Guyana is also home to some very interesting clubs. There's Anns Grove FC, whose club motto is success through hard work and determination. Looks like something I'd see in IB. You also got Santos FC, Georgetown. And I mean, look at how hard this badge goes, because god damn. Oh, also, The Jonestown incident happened in this country. Montserrat, since becoming a FIFA member in 1998, they have never qualified for the World Cup, not even come close. And the team is most known for its appearance in a match called the Other Final, where on the same day as the 2002 World Cup final, the two lowest ranked teams in Bhutan and Montserrat played a friendly. Montserrat lost 4-0. Belize has never qualified for the World Cup, but their best qualification campaign was back in 2014 when Dion McCauley single-handedly carried Belize. He scored in 7 of the nation's 8 qualifiers and saw them narrowly miss out on the 3rd round. However, at the end of World Cup qualifiers, 3 players ended up tied for top scorer: Luis Suarez, Robin van Persie, and Dion McCauley. Next up, we have Group E with Jamaica, Guatemala, Dominican Republic, Dominica, and British Virgin Islands. Jamaica has been to one World Cup back in 1998 where they won one group and donned these absolute beauties. Since then, Jamaica has qualified for the final round of qualifiers 3 times and has fallen short every time. The team actually has quite a few notable Premier League players: Mikel Antonio, Bobby De Cordova-Reid, and Ethan Pinnock. And with them all being over 30, this is probably their last chance to make it to a World Cup. Guatemala has never qualified for the World Cup, but got very, very close to making it to the Intercontinental Playoffs back in 2006. On the final day, Guatemala needed to beat Costa Rica and see Trinidad lose to Mexico. I mean, Trinidad losing to Mexico, that seems pretty easy. And Guatemala got the hard part out of the way by winning 3-1. But unfortunately, somehow, someway, Trinidad triumphed against Mexico. And ever since, Guatemala has not even come close to the final round. Oh, also, they have a club called Deportivo Malacateco, and its badge looks like if you asked someone on Fiverr to make a new Chicago Bulls logo for Latin Night. The Dominican Republic has never qualified for the World Cup and has never made it to the final round, and it makes sense because this country more so prefers baseball. Mariano Diaz, who used to play for Real Madrid, actually played a single game for the Dominican Republic back in 2013, but then retired from the national team in hopes of representing Spain. How'd that go, buddy? Dominica has never qualified for the World Cup. You're going to be hearing this a lot. Their all-time top scorer is Julian Wade, a guy who made his senior debut for Montserrat but then had to switch back because he was actually ineligible to represent them. Also, remember Queen's Park Rangers in Grenada? Well, let me introduce you to Dominica's Exodus FC. What is it with the Caribbean and QPR? If it isn't the winners of the Virgin Derby from a few months ago. The British Virgin Islands have never qualified for the World Cup. There's not much about this team, but did you know Andrea Villaboas had his first job here as a technical director? Also, the British Virgin Islands is home of evil Real Madrid. And finally, there's Group F, which houses El Salvador, Suriname, Puerto Rico, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Anguilla. El Salvador has 2 appearances at the World Cup back in 1970 and 1986. Both times, they failed to win. But they did manage to score their first ever goal in the World Cup in '82, in a 10-1 loss to Hungary. Since then, though, all they've been able to do is reach the final round 4 times, with their most recent appearance being back in 2022. Also, for some reason, at the beginning of next year, they're supposed to play Thailand in a friendly in Charlotte. Puerto Rico, aka Bad Bunny Land, has never qualified for a World Cup. A good portion of their squad is currently filled with college kids, so I guess the future should be decently bright. The nation's all-time top scorer is Hector Ramos with 18 goals between 2010 and 2019. He made his senior debut at Club Sevilla FC Puerto Rico, and yes, they are actually affiliated with the Spanish club. Over the decades, there have been numerous Dutch-born players of Surinamese descent who ended up playing for the Netherlands. Some include Ruud Gullit, Frank Rijkaard, Edgar Davids, Clarence Seedorf, Patrick Kluivert, and Virgil van Dijk. However, in 2019, Suriname made it so any of the diaspora in the Netherlands could actually represent Suriname. And that's benefited them a lot, and the results have slowly been improving. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, they have never qualified for the World Cup, but they did actually have one appearance in the Gold Cup back in 1996. Their most capped player is Cornelius Stewart with 69 caps, and he's been active since 2007. The forward has played his club football in countries like Canada, Finland, Maldives, India, Bangladesh, and right now he's playing in Indonesia. St. Vincent and the Grenadines is also home of Becky FC, whose logo is absolute peak graphic design. Anguilla was the other team that advanced this round from the first. It is also the first time they have ever advanced past the first round of World Cup qualifiers. The domestic league is called the AFA Senior Malay League, and the title winners in 2015-16 was a club called Salsa Ballers. I love this game. Over in Group A, Honduras have started off just as you'd expect with 6 points in dominating performances versus Cuba and Bermuda. Just below them is Cuba, who only have 3 points because the Cayman Islands had visa issues because of the US's overly dumb and complicated government policy on traveling to Cuba. The Cayman Islands did, however, beat Antigua and Barbuda thanks to a last-minute goal. And that wasn't the only time Antigua and Barbuda was tortured by a last-minute goal, because against Bermuda, they fumbled a 1-0 lead in the 90th minute. Costa Rica is off to a flying start with 6 of 6 points, 7 goals scored, and none conceded. Second is currently held by Trinidad, who struggled versus Grenada and had to come back from 2-0 down. Meanwhile, St. Kitts and Nevis also grabbed 3 points off the Bahamas and are just behind in third. Group C is pretty much already decided at this point, with Curaçao and Haiti both at the top with 6 points. These two will play each other next summer to determine who probably wins the group most likely. Group D is pretty similar, with both Nicaragua and Panama earning 6 of 6 points. Still hanging in there though is Guyana, who beat Belize 3-1. Same situation in Group E as well. Guatemala absolutely destroyed everyone in their path so far, scoring 9 goals and conceding none. Jamaica are tied with them, but their performances haven't necessarily been that convincing. Finally, in Group F, Suriname are top after dismantling both St. Vincent and Anguilla. Puerto Rico is 2 points behind them after putting 8 past Anguilla and escaping with a huge draw in El Salvador. For El Salvador, the pain never ends because that extended to a 22-game winless run. Thankfully though, they finally broke the code and beat St. Vincent and the Grenadines to stay in the fight. On to Asian qualifiers, where the last qualifiers of round 2 happened. In Group A, Qatar had already clinched a spot in the next round, so all the focus was on the battle for the remaining qualification spot between India, Kuwait, and Afghanistan. The second to last match day didn't see any change as both games played out goalless draws. However, on the last match day, India stunned the Qataris by going up 1-0, and if that result stood, the Indians would 100% be going into the next round. However, the Qataris equalized in the 72nd minute, but on second view, you can clearly see that the ball was all the way out before it was dragged back in and put into the net. No review, no nothing, the goal stood, and in the end it completely f***ed over India as they eventually lost 2-1. Meanwhile, Kuwait scored a late winner versus Afghanistan to confirm a ticket to the third round. And just to make things worse for Indian football, their national hero Sunil Khetri retired after the window. He caps off one of the greatest international careers anyone could have with 94 goals in 151 caps. India, now you have no choice. You actually have to produce some kind of quality here. Just a little. Just a smidge. Otherwise you're fucked.
What you doing there, Bill? Satellite dish trouble?
No, I'm just up here to kill myself.
Group B saw Japan confirm their spot in the last window, while Syria were close to sealing their own. However, North Korea had something to say about that as they beat Syria with a goal in the 2nd minute of stoppage time. Syria got bottled up and trashed by Japan, and in the following match, once more, the North Koreans took advantage of their misery by demolishing Myanmar and stealing the 2nd qualification spot on the last day. South Korea pretty much needed just 1 more point to move on to the next round, and they made it look almost too easy by single-handedly increasing the homicide rate in Singapore by 3%. Over in the battle for second between China and Thailand, the two nations played out a 1-1 draw, which was far more favorable for the Thais because their last match was versus Singapore, while China had to play South Korea in Seoul. However, the Chinese did well to fend off the Koreans and only lost 1-0. So now, Chinese hopes relied in the hands of China 2 Electric Boogaloo. Because if Thailand beat Singapore by a margin of 3 or more, it was simply Guangzhou. The Thais went full guns blazing early on, but just could not score past Singaporean keeper Hassan Sunny. But finally, Thailand drew first blood in the 36th minute. 2 more goals, and they're through. Into the second half, the Thais had a really good chance to make it too, but again, Hassan Sunny makes an unbelievable stop. Then minutes later, Singapore spoiled the party, stun on the counter, and now Thailand need to score 3 more again. The War Elephants were able to grab 2 more goals later on, but that would be all as they were eliminated by the strong hands of Hassan Sunny. That means China moves on to the next round, and to express their appreciation to their new overlord, Chinese netizens found out that Hassan Sunny actually had a food stall and started giving it 5-star reviews galore. There were even fans who came to the stall to celebrate, and some even transferred crazy amounts of money in the name of gratitude. And this was all followed up by a thank you message from Hassan Sunny, which garnered over 100 million views on Weibo. Group D wasn't as eventful, but it was pretty close in the table with Kyrgyzstan and Oman tied with 9 points, and Malaysia just behind them in third. Malaysia needed to beat Kyrgyzstan to actually have any hope of qualifying, but unfortunately they could only get a point. Oman beat Taiwan 3-0, so this pretty much sealed Malaysia's doom. resume. But it only got worse for Malaysia because 2 days after their last game, Asian Cup hero Faisal Halim was victim to an acid attack. For a while, his career was in question, but thankfully he just recently returned to action at club level. But the misfortunes don't end there, because their promising head coach Kim Pan-gon resigned in mid-July. Anyways, back to qualifiers, Oman and Kyrgyzstan played out a 1-1 draw to cap off Group D. So in the end, thanks to Malaysia actually, Oman win the group with Kyrgyzstan advancing with them. Group E was pretty much locked down last window. Iran and Uzbekistan did play each other in June, but it ended in a 0-0 draw, so everything stays the same. Iraq became one of 3 other nations to earn all 18 of 18 points in their group after wins versus Indonesia and then Vietnam. And Indonesia was able to qualify for the next round after a 2-0 win versus the Philippines. It's the nation's first ever appearance in the 3rd round. Group G saw Saudi Arabia at the top with Asian Cup winners Jordan 3 points behind them. But not for long, as Jordan once again defied all odds and beat Tajikistan and Saudi Arabia to sneak into first due to goal difference. Group H was pretty much decided with the UAE and Bahrain clear favorites to go through after 4 games played. The UAE took a chunk out of Mount Everest and then drew with Bahrain to win the group. And Bahrain's 2 draws this window was enough to see them in the next round for the first time in 14 years. Finally, in Group I, Australia was absolutely dominating before the window and nothing changed after as they beat Bangladesh and then manhandled Palestine. So this sees the Aussies in the next round after an almost effortless campaign. Meanwhile, Palestine's draw with Lebanon in the second to last match day was enough to see them advance to the 3rd round for the first time ever. A beautiful story amidst the darkness unfolding in Gaza. On to the last region that played qualifiers in June, Africa. Starting the June window, Egypt were top of their group with 2 wins, while both Burkina Faso and Guinea-Bissau were tied for second with 4 points. The Egyptians had a pretty solid window, earning 4 points to stay at the top. Burkina Faso, on the other hand, fumbled second place away after choking a 2-0 lead away versus Sierra Leone at home. This proved Guinea-Bissau's hard-fought draw versus Egypt to be crucial as they hop into the playoff spot now. Senegal and Sudan were tied for first in Group B, with the Senegalese just ahead due to goal difference. That changed, however, when Senegal dropped yet another point after conceding a late goal against DR Congo. Meanwhile, Sudan bagged themselves 2 wins, including one in the Sudan Derby, which now sees them hop into first 2 points above the Senegalese. Don't count out DR Congo though, because they are just hanging in there in 3rd after beating Togo. Group C was seeing some of the most shocking scenes as before June, Rwanda and South Africa sat 1-2 while Nigeria were struggling. And the struggles for Nigeria continued. They drew with South Africa at home and then lost to goddamn Benin. It makes sense though, because their coach who led them to the AFCON final left in March, and also the team so precisely resembles this meme. Speaking of Benin, they had a sensational window in June. They also beat Rwanda and went from last place to 3rd, where they're now tied on points with everyone else. Rwanda though did manage to bounce back, beating Lesotho, which still sees them in first. And just behind them by a single goal in the table is South Africa, who collected a solid 4 points in June. Group D saw 3 teams tied for first, and it only got more chaotic because besides Eswatini, every team managed to steal at least a point from one of their opponents. Cameroon destroyed Cape Verde beat Libya 1-0, Libya beat Mauritius 2-1, Mauritius beat Eswatini 2-1, and Eswatini also lost to Angola, and Angola drew with Cameroon. So at the end of all of this, Cameroon just edges Libya to hold on to the top spot. And Cape Verde is tied on points with Libya in 3rd, and Angola is also still in the hunt with 6 points in 4th. It was a bit of a mess before Group E started because Eritrea withdrew before the campaign. So that saw Tanzania, Niger, Zambia, and Morocco all tied on 3 points, but the Moroccans still had a game in hand. And as you'd expect, they took care of things swiftly in June with 2 wins, including a 6-0 drubbing of Congo. Prior to that game, however, Congo was to host Niger in the DR Congo because their stadium didn't meet regulations. However, Congo refused, and Niger was awarded the easiest points they'll ever receive. Zambia and Tanzania also played this window, and it was an early goal that sealed the deal for African Wisconsin. So now looking at the table, Morocco has 9 of 9 points and sits in first, while Niger and Tanzania still remain tied on points, and Zambia are holding on by the skin of their teeth in 4th after an awful window. Over to Group F, where Ivory Coast and Gabon were tied for first. The two played against each other in June, and the AFCON champs prevailed 1-0. The Ivorians then finished finished off the window with the draw vs Kenya, while Gabon managed to bounce back in a 3-2 win vs Gambia. Burundi actually earned the same amount of points as Ivory Coast to stay in the mix. So now looking at the table, Ivory Coast is sitting at the top, Gabon is just 1 point behind them, and Burundi is third, 2 points below the playoff spots. Group G before the window was pretty damn close, with Algeria in first with 6 points and second to fifth all tied on 3. Algeria did not start June well though, as they lost to Guinea 2-1, but they did well to bounce back against Uganda. Guinea had the chance to jump into the top 2 thanks to their win vs Algeria, but then they conceded a last minute winner from Mozambique. Mozambique also beat Somalia to complete a fantastic window for them. So now looking at the table, Algeria and Mozambique, of all teams, are tied on points, while Botswana, Guinea, and Uganda still can't be separated as they all earn 3 points each this window. Group H saw Tunisia and Equatorial Guinea tied on 6 points. Well, that was until Equatorial Guinea saw both of their wins versus Liberia and Namibia taken away because they had fielded an ineligible player. Either way, the former top 2 played each other in June, and Tunisia won 1-0 through a single penalty. Equatorial Guinea then managed to win in their following game versus Malawi. As for Tunisia, they still can't escape the Namibians. Namibia also collected a draw with Liberia, and Liberia collected 3 points from a 1-0 win for Sao Tome and Principe. Sao Tome and Principe also lost to Malawi in this window. So now looking at the table, Tunisia hold first with 10 points. Namibia, thanks to their gifted 3 points and another 2 points this window, now sit nicely in second with 8 points. And right behind the top 2 is Liberia and Malawi. Finally in Group I, it was the Comoros on top continuing their dream run. Mali was 2 points behind them in second, third was Madagascar, and while too early to call, Ghana was in danger of not qualifying. However, the Ghanaians turned their campaign around. They came back from 1-0 down to beat Mali in the 4th minute of stoppage time. Then the Black Stars beat the Central African Republic in a 7-goal thriller to cap off the window with all 6 points. On the other hand, first place Comoros lost to Madagascar to start the window, but bounced back and defeated Chad 2-0. Speaking of Madagascar, after their win, they then drew with Mali. And so after all of this, the Comoros still hold on to the lead, but Ghana are now tied on points with them. Madagascar's 4-point window sees them not too far from what seemed to be the impossible. And then there's Mali, who would have been favorites to win this group, but find themselves in 4th due to underwhelming performance after underwhelming performance. We start with the return of everyone's favorite confederation, CONMEBOL. Going into the 7th match day, Argentina was leading with Uruguay 2 points behind them. Meanwhile, the yellow, blue, and red brigade of Colombia, Venezuela, and Ecuador filled out 3rd to 5th. Brazil, on the other hand, had been off to an underwhelming start, but in the first month of this year, they replaced their underwhelming manager with Dorival Jr. Right below them in the playoff spot was Paraguay, who appointed Gustavo Alfaro a month before the window. Finally, the teams outside looking in include Chile, Bolivia, and Peru, who is still winless and actually hasn't defeated a South American opponent in almost 2 years now. The Sea Level Merchants were back home to start the window, and this time they played in El Alto, which literally means the tall in Spanish. The city is 13,620 feet above sea level. That is over 1,600 more feet than La Paz. This is actually starting to get out of hand. Next thing you know, Nepal is going to be playing in f***ing Everest in the next cycle. Help me! Houston! Help me! And some of you might be wondering, does this affect the ball? To answer your question, yes it does. With scrambled brains and some level of asphyxiation probably, Mano Tengofe was absolutely no match for the mountain dwellers as Bolivia won 4-0. Over in Buenos Aires, Julian Alvarez nonchalantly scored this insane goal, and Argentina made easy work of Chile. CONMEBOL suspended Uruguay's Darwin Núñez for 5 games simply because he was trying to protect his family, because God forbid the Federation and the Charlotte Police Department couldn't. This was a massive hit to Uruguay's strong campaign so far, as Núñez was not only their top scorer, but the competition's top scorer, and it showed as Uruguay collected 2 goalless draws this window. Despite a new coach, the struggles continued for Brazil as they just escaped Ecuador with a 1-0 win at home. And after 68 minutes played in Lima, the Peruvians were once again able to dream as Alexander Callens puts his team up against Colombia, and then Luis Diaz equalized 14 minutes later. Into the next match day, and we'd witness a rematch of the Copa America final, and in just 25 minutes, the freaky man Yerson Mosquera gives Colombia the advantage. Argentina's Nico Gonzalez would not let that slide, however. He flies past Mosquera and slots home the equalizer minutes into the second half. Then 12 minutes later, Colombia force their way into the box and Otamendi makes an error in judgment. James Rodriguez makes no mistake from the box and Colombia hold on to the win. Their mothers are from Italy, their grandfathers are probably SS soldiers, but their passport says Argentina. Ole! Chile and Bolivia played out a bit earlier, and in just 13 minutes, Bolivia stunned everyone again. But you must never forget, these men are the sea level merchants. They may be prime Barcelona in the crowds, but they're worse than Guam on soil. However, right before halftime, the altitude amateurs open up Chile's god-awful defense once more, and the sea level merchants score again. Wait, what? Wait, what? They won? At under 2,000 feet altitude? That's right. It has never been more over for South American football. Bolivia has f***ing evolved. This is in fact their first win away from home since 1993. This kid Terceros is really good, by the way. Ecuador were pretty unlucky not to get a result in Brazil, but they did manage to beat Peru at home thanks to a single goal from Ener Valencia. Speaking of Brazil, head coach Dorival Jr., hours before the second game of the window, made a claim about how Brazil will be in the World Cup final. He added, "You can film me while I'm saying this. I have no doubts. We will be there." Revoke the passports of him and every player on this team now. There is a saying, club success doesn't necessarily mean international success, and it has once again been validated, because Brazil have a Ballon d'Or candidate that plays for Real Madrid on this team, and he's f***ing terrible. This is genuinely the worst Brazilian team I've ever seen.
Hello, Ian. Long time no see.
But I have to say, Gustavo Alfaro strikes again. The journeyman simply cannot be stopped, and he has single-handedly revived Paraguay's World Cup campaign going forward. And so, after yet another eventful CONMEBOL window, here are your standings now. Argentina still maintain a 2-point lead up top. Colombia hop over Uruguay after that emphatic win over the current table leaders. Ecuador, with a single win, slides into 4th. Brazil, despite yet another severely underwhelming window, do actually go up a spot because they earn more points than Venezuela. However, they are closer to danger more than ever, as 7th place Paraguay are just 1 point below them. But funnily enough, tied on points with the Paraguayans is Bolivia, who have actually scored the 3rd most goals so far. This might be the funniest team in the region right now. Meanwhile, Chile dropped to 9th. They have not won a qualifier in nearly a year. It's even worse for bottom place Peru though, because they haven't even won. But you know what's even crazier? This is the first window in the 2026 cycle that hasn't seen a red card in any of the South American fixtures. The West has fallen. Welcome to glorious Oceania, where we only know there's islands there because of these geometric shapes. But finally, Oceania begins their World Cup cycle. And reminder, they actually will have at least one team in this tournament. For now though, it's just the first round. And here we have the 4 worst ranked teams playing in a knockout round. You got semifinals, the teams that win that go on to the final, and the winner of the final moves on to the second round. So only one team actually escapes the first round here. Now, before we go into any of the results though, we have some new representatives to meet. We'll start with the worst ranked of the 4, Tonga. Tonga have never qualified for the World Cup, and they also have never made it past the first round. And funnily enough, I actually learned this while doing research. I don't even think this is really funny. This is actually f***ing terrible. They rank 3rd for highest natural disaster risk of any country in the world. I mean, the country suffered a volcanic eruption and a tsunami in 2022. And of course, this makes it even harder for the country to actually flourish in the beautiful game. But the Tonga FA has made strides by building new facilities, not only for football, but the community, as they are built to withhold natural disasters as well. And now more than ever, the children of Tonga can actually play grassroots football. Only time will tell if this translates into international success though. Samoa has never qualified for the World Cup, but have made it to the second round twice. They've also made 3 appearances in the OFC Nations Cup, but have never made it past the group stages. There's also a pretty significant diaspora of Samoans in New Zealand, which is why a lot of them play in the New Zealand leagues. And on the topic of New Zealand, there's a club in Samoa called Kiwi FC, and this might be the funniest batch in the series so far.
Hello everyone, it is I from post-production. I just wanted to mention how while I was editing this video, I learned that Sepp Blatter was given the title of Teleofoa, which is something primarily given to chiefs, and this was during his visit. He also wore some clothes during his visit. Now brace yourselves for this one, because, let me tell you, your eyes won't be the same after this.
American Samoa has never qualified for the World Cup and has never made it past the first round. And of course, they're most well known for their infamous loss to Australia, 31-0. However, in November 2011, the team won its first game in 28 years. This would give birth to a documentary in 2014, and a not-so-great movie in 2023. One of the goal scorers in that win, though, was 17-year-old Shalim Luwani, who went on to play in the NFL for 5 years. And the team was guided by head coach Thomas Rongen, and he will be returning to coach the team again in this window. The Cook Islands, unfortunately, they do not live up to their name and have never qualified for the World Cup, and they've also never made it past the first round. And honestly, in the last decade, it's been pretty tough for the Cookians. Yes, that's actually what you call the people of the Cook Islands. After a loss to American Samoa in 2015, the national team didn't play another game until March 2022. Their form has suffered because of it, but with the recent win versus Tonga, it could give them a morale boost. We start with Cook Islands versus Tonga, and god damn, those are some beautiful looking shirts. Tonga, though, would go on to win this pretty comfortably with a 3-1 result. Just a couple hours later, the Samoan derby was played out, and it would once again be Samoa to get the better of their little brothers. No Rongen magic this time, as Samoa won 2-0. So it all came down to a final between Tonga and Samoa. The winner would be advancing to the second round. Tonga took the lead right before halftime, but then in the 82nd minute, Luke Salisbury would score a wonder goal to equalize for the Samoans. The game then went to extra time, and in the 105th minute, Jefferson Fatmato would send his nation to the next round. It's time for Asian qualifiers, and it was like it was just yesterday I was giving you lore about the Guam national team, and now we've arrived at the third round. There are just 18 teams remaining now who will battle for a ticket to North America. We'll have to see whether or not Iraq qualifies and George Bush is still alive by then, but for now, let's go over the new format. In the third round, you'll see 3 groups with 6 teams each. In each group, the top 2 will automatically qualify for the World Cup, while 3rd and 4th will move on to the 4th round for a chance of redemption. We'll start with Group A, which had Iran, Qatar, Uzbekistan, UAE, Kyrgyzstan, and North Korea. Uzbekistan started their campaign really well as they took an early lead versus North Korea. However, just 17 minutes later, North Korea wins a penalty, but it's saved by the keeper. The Uzbeks would go on to win this one and earn all 3 points. Iran also collected a win after beating Kyrgyzstan 1-0 at home. Qatar versus UAE followed with referee Sean Evans. The UAE had not beaten Qatar since 2015. This definitely was not the night things would change as the Qataris scored early on. However, come the second half, the UAE went full guns blazing and scored 3 unanswered to stun the home crowd. Qatar then played North Korea in Laos. And I don't know what the these North Koreans have been squatting, but it appears they have a new missile program. But fear not, Qataris. Give me penalty, says Akram Afif, and Qatar equalize. 13 minutes later, Almoez Ali thumps it into the net, and next thing you know, someone sent the monsoons. But that was no match for the 10-men North Koreans and their thunder thighs. I mean, seriously, even the keeper was trying to score from the other side of the pitch. Anyways, nothing could separate the two. North Korea gets a valuable draw, while Qatar are in trouble. Indians most definitely have been eating good so far. Damn. Over to Bishkek, we saw a thrilling duel in Central Asia as both Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan traded blows throughout the first half. Then with the game tied 2 apiece, Ostan Uranov with some sweet technique blasts it home to give Uzbekistan another 3 points in the window. Finally, to end off Group A in September, Iran did just enough to beat UAE away from home to earn 6-6 as well. So looking at the table now, Uzbekistan just edges Iran thanks to the goal scored tiebreaker. UAE is just behind the top 2 with North Korea rounding off your top 4. In Group B, we have South Korea, Iraq, Jordan, Oman, Palestine, and Kuwait. After a showing of South Korean ineptitude in front of goal and some incredible Palestinian resistance, we witnessed the first 0-0 result of the third round. All the while that was happening, head coach Hong Myung-bo was booed to oblivion and fans were already calling for his head. Palestine, though, can be super optimistic, having stolen a point away from an Asian giant.
Because the war, we didn't do camping. The players, it wasn't with us all this time. Like me, I'm without a team for 1 year because the league is stopped in Palestine. So I train alone, I train with my friends, and I have responsibility to be here and to play this match. and to take 1 point and to start the qualifier with 1 point. We're so proud. We did very well.
Meanwhile in Basra, Iraq collected a 1-0 victory thanks to a goal from Ayman Hussein, who just continues to be on a tear in 2024. Jordan are most definitely a dark horse to qualify after their Asian Cup performances and a recent win versus Saudi Arabia. Things were looking really good for the Jordanians, but then a little too much of a tug on the shirts, and Kuwait spoiled the party in the second minute of stoppage time. Jordan did at least manage to right their wrongs with a solid 3-1 win against Palestine. South Korea also redeemed themselves after Son Heung-min scored the winner against Oman with just 8 minutes left. Then to end off September for Group B, Kuwait and Iraq played out a goalless draw. Already, it's a close race for the top spot in Group B. Jordan sit first thanks to the goal score tiebreaker with South Korea and Iraq just behind them. Meanwhile, Kuwait finishes up your top 4. Finally, the last group: Japan, Australia, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, China, and Indonesia. This is honestly the most exciting one. And it all started with Japan putting 7 past China. And let me tell you, this isn't the first time Japan's had no regard for Chinese life. Australia, on the other hand, gave its fans a showing of utter shit. And even the football gods couldn't allow this as Bahrain steal away victory because of an own goal.
Tomorrow I'm doing 9/11.
For Indonesia, this was their first time in the third round, but it didn't appear that way as they took the lead against Saudi Arabia just 18 minutes in. However, Saudi Arabia responded right before halftime thanks to a deflection. They then had the fortune of Indonesia's keeper Martin Paes conceding a penalty with just 14 minutes remaining. However, the penalty is pretty ass and Indonesia steal a point away in a very impressive debut. Speaking of debuts, aside from the near match-costing error, Martin Paes was phenomenal in this match, making 3 crucial saves. Also, since he's played, FC Dallas has absolutely exploded on social media. I can understand Tokyo Verdy, Cerezo Osaka, even Oxford United. Dallas? Indonesia then went back home to a rocking atmosphere, kept that same gritty style, and managed a draw with a severely underwhelming Aussie side.
Be a lot of questions at home, obviously, after failing to score and failing to beat teams that probably, well, definitely ranked lower in the world. What message you want to pass on in terms of why that didn't happen and what we can look forward to?
Yeah, look, I can only do so much.
Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia continues to struggle as they concede early to China. This is the same Chinese side that just hours prior banned 43 people for life over allegations of match fixing. And to make things even worse, a Saudi pulls a Beckham, and now the team's down to 10 men. Nevertheless, Saudi Arabia finds an equalizer off a corner in the 38th minute, and then a winner off another corner in the 90th. Finally, we witness Japan destroy Bahrain 5-0. God knows where this team was in the Asian Cup. Group C is currently occupied by the Japanese. That is yet another World War II joke. I'm gonna need to stop now. Saudi Arabia haven't been amazing this window, but still have managed to place second so far, while third and fourth is surprisingly held by Bahrain and Indonesia, mainly because China and Australia are underwhelming beyond comprehension. But hey, you know, how has Vietnam been doing this window?
苏宝，威任，hai không.
Into OFC, and we are into the second round of Oceania qualifiers with 8 teams remaining. Very simple format once again, 2 groups of 4 teams each. Teams will play each other just once, and the top 2 will advance to the third round. In Group A, we have New Zealand, Tahiti, Vanuatu, and Samoa. New Zealand has 2 World Cup appearances under their belts, with their first being back in 1982. 2010, though, was by far the most memorable. They defeated Bahrain 1-0 at home in the second leg to qualify for the tournament. The Kiwis then drew with Slovakia, reigning champions Italy, and Paraguay. Unfortunately, though, it wasn't enough to advance, but New Zealand were the only unbeaten team in the 2010 World Cup. Their all-time top scorer, Chris Wood, played in that tournament. He was 18 at the time. He's now 32. And this should be a pretty easy round for the Kiwis, as they have not lost to an OFC opponent in the last 12 years. Tahiti have never qualified for the World Cup. However, back in 2012, they made history and won their first ever OFC Nations Cup. It was the first time the tournament saw a winner that wasn't New Zealand or Australia. This triumph also meant an appearance in the 2013 Confederations Cup. It didn't really go that well, though. Toa Alto's all-time top scorer is Teanui Teho, who has family ties with 3 other Tahiti national team players. Vanuatu has never qualified for the World Cup, but they are well known in the OFC sphere as a team that creates some surprises from time to time. They beat New Zealand in 2004 and prevented the Kiwis from qualifying for World Cup 2002. Then in 2007, Vanuatu beat the Solomon Islands for the first time since 1998. They just recently beat them again in this year's OFC Nations Cup as well, and Vanuatu would actually go on to reach the final of of this tournament for the first time in its history. Also, since I don't really get that many opportunities to talk about, a country like Vanuatu, here's some Vietnamese lore about Vanuatu. In Vietnam, Vanuatu is known as Thân Đảo, which means New Island. This is because back in the early 1900s, the French sent over 21,000 indentured workers to the country where they were forced to work in poor conditions. At its peak, Viets made up about 10% of Vanuatu during the colonial period. Since then, though, that number has shrunk drastically. That said, though, there are still a good amount of Vietnamese-owned businesses in Vanuatu, including a restaurant called Joe. Group B features the Solomon Islands, Fiji, New Caledonia, and Papua New Guinea. The Solomon Islands have never qualified for the World Cup. They have reached the final of OFC qualifiers multiple times, but each time, they have been torn apart from limb to limb. However, during the last qualification cycle, there was a very exciting prospect who showed glimpses of his talent, Rafael Leao. He gained the attention of some clubs, and in 2023 became the first Solomon Islander to sign for a professional club in Europe. And at just 21 years old, the striker has 11 goals in 20 caps. Currently, though, he's gone dry throughout 2024. Fiji have never qualified for the World Cup. The team's best period was between the 90s and early 2000s, where Fiji nearly advanced to the Intercontinental Playoffs and World Cup qualifiers. Unfortunately, though, Australia. Fiji's greatest player of all time is a living legend, Roy Krishna. Krishna has scored 42 times in 59 caps, which is the most not only for Fiji, but all of OFC. And he's not shown any signs of stopping either. He was top scorer of the last OFC Nations Cup with 5 goals. New Caledonia, they've never qualified for the World Cup, and their federation logo looks like something out of a spy movie. The country did experience a fair amount of success in the early 2010s though. Gold medal in the Pacific Games, and then they shocked everyone by beating New Zealand in the semis of the 2012 OFC Nations Cup. The man who opened the scoring was Bertrand Kai, who actually won Oceania Footballer of the Year in 2011. It was the first time a New Caledonian had won the award since Christian Karambu, who helped France win the World Cup in 1998. Papua New Guinea has never qualified for the World Cup, and their federation certainly isn't helping itself. Throughout the 2010s, the Papua New Guinea National Soccer League was being run like a proper circus. Clubs not interested in registering for the new season, teams withdrawing right before the season, during the season, and even during the playoffs. Some would even disband mid-season, citing poor management. And the politics within the federation and the country only made things worse. Now, how do I know literally any of this? Well, for some reason, the Papua New Guinea National Soccer League page on Wikipedia is a lot bigger than I thought it'd be. Throughout this period as well, though, Papua New Guinea managed to reach the finals of the 2016 OFC Nations Cup, a tournament they hosted. Alright, so there was only 2 games played in each group, so, it's not going to be really that exciting. Group A, things start well for New Caledonia, who easily take victory against Papua New Guinea. Fiji get a massive victory against group favorite Solomon Islands, and who else but Roy Krishna to score the only goal. So after a single game, New Caledonia and Fiji are tied with 3 points at the top. Group B, on the other hand, has started pretty straightforward for New Zealand, who cleaned up shop against Tahiti without breaking a sweat. And Vanuatu absolutely demolished Samoa 4-1. So at the end of October, Vanuatu is actually first because of their goal difference, and right behind them is New Zealand. Over to CONMEBOL, where we are most definitely going to be expecting more as we near the halfway point. Before the window, however, Argentina was still first despite a loss because the Colombians drew with Peru. Then you had third place Uruguay just a point behind Los Cafeteros, with Ecuador 4 points below. And then from 5th to 8th is an absolute dogfight between the underwhelming and the overachieving. Brazil has been awful under Dorival Jr. so far, while Venezuela are doing wonders holding on to the last automatic spot. Paraguay sit just a point behind them thanks to their triumph over the Brazilians, and tied with Paraguay is Bolivia, who currently have scored the 3rd most goals in the competition so far. And then there's Chile and Peru having an ass off. And not the good one. October officially kicked off with the match between Bolivia and Colombia. Pretty straightforward victory for the Colombians, I'd say. Unfortunately for them, we're returning to El Alto, baby! But hold your horses, because after denying Colombia a goal-scoring opportunity, the Sea Level Merchants lose a defender. Which, we are so back, Conma Bros. But also, this meant Bolivia now had a massive disadvantage early on against Colombia, one of the hottest teams in the world right now. Is what I would say if I was a fool. Oh no, Bolivia has to play with 1 less man. I guess you've forgotten that 11 Colombians are currently playing without oxygen. And so right at the hour mark, Miguel Terceros, a wonder boy, a symbolism of a new age, stuns the 2nd place Colombians to win their 3rd straight qualifier. These are Sea Level Merchants no more. Tremble in fear, for we are now facing South America's new overlords, the Altitude Alphas. Ecuador and Paraguay played at the same time, and before the game, Julio Enciso claimed he almost died and fainted on a plane because he hadn't slept or eaten well. Back to the game, however, Gustavo Alfaro's return to Ecuador saw him steal a point away in a 0-0 draw. Another solid performance from Paraguay. Although, I gotta say, I think Ecuador probably should have had a penalty in this game. So, remember last month when Emi Martinez slapped that camera out of his face? Well, that earned him a 2-game suspension, including Argentina's qualifier in Venezuela, where the pitch was just a little wet. Argentina, though, found an early goal through Venezuela's errors in the back. However, outside of that, the waterlogged pitch acted as an equilibrium, which opened the door for Venezuela to equalize in the 65th minute. In the end, the game ended 1-1, with Venezuela stealing yet another crucial point away from a giant. Over in Santiago for Chile vs Brazil, and it only took 2 minutes for 34-year-old Eduardo Vargas to score, which probably triggered every Brazilian to imagine Dorival Jr. in the place of that referee on the 30th of June 2013. Fortunately for Dorival, this is Chile. You could be using the most prehistoric tactics imaginable and still somehow win with players from Botafogo. But I can't really guarantee your own fans will change their minds on certain things. One figure, though, is actually blaming the players more than the coach. The president of Brazil. Lula reportedly recently met with the federation and said they should not call up Brazilians playing in Europe, as he believes those who are abroad are no better than those who are in Brazil. I wonder how that will end up. The qualifiers' top scorer, Darwin Nunez, was back for Uruguay, but it would be Peru's day as they stunned their opponents in the 88th minute to earn their first victory of the cycle. On to the next match day, and just look at these shirts. Oh my god! Against Chile, the classy-looking Colombians would take care of the worst team in the region 4-0. A solid bounce back after the trauma in El Alto. Venezuela continued their impressive run into match day 10 with an early goal versus Paraguay.
Que viva Venezuela en esa mierda, caballero.
However, in the second half, Paraguay strike back twice through Arnaldo Sanabria and continue their impressive run under the wing of Gustavo Alfaro, who I am fully convinced at this point could save the Argentinian economy. Because since his appointment, Paraguay has earned 8 points in their last 4 games. And after yet another goalless draw, Uruguay in the same amount of games has earned just 3 points. The Altitude Alphas descended upon Buenos Aires, eager to extend their conquest of South America. But waiting for them was an all too familiar nightmare: Lionel Messi. And not only did Bolivia meet their match, they met their longtime tormentor as Messi committed a massacre on live TV and Argentina went on to win 6-0. Finally, to end off October for South America, Brazil finally won a game comfortably versus Peru. And what do you know, 3 of those goals were scored by Brazilians that play in Europe. And so, after 10 games played, Argentina are still your leaders with 22 points. Second is Colombia with 19 points. Yet again, they failed to take advantage of Argentina's mishaps, but are in a very secure spot. Uruguay should be very lucky that these qualifiers have been so chaotic because they are still third, but tied with them on points is Brazil, who despite showing some god-awful football, did still earn 6 of 6 points for the first time since September 2023. To cover the rest of the automatic spots, you have Ecuador and Paraguay tied on 13 points. Ecuador will not be happy having earned just 2 points this window. However, Paraguay will be over the moon after hopping into 6th with 4 points this October. In the playoff spot is the funniest team in the region, the Altitude Alphas, Bolivia. They have managed to score the 4th most goals in the competition and also have conceded more than Chile. Venezuela doesn't need to fire off any flares right now, but after another disappointing window, they've dropped from 6th to 8th. And thanks to their win versus Uruguay, Peru are no longer at rock bottom. That now belongs to their rivals Chile, who haven't earned a point since November 2023. This team was 3rd in FIFA rankings just 9 years ago. Lastly, we have Asia's qualifiers to talk about. To start the window in Group A, Uzbekistan and Iran were tied on points at the top, and they played each other in a pretty underwhelming 0-0 draw. Meanwhile, 3rd place UAE and 4th place North Korea also played to begin October. The Emiratis took the lead in the 66th minute, however North Korea are given a penalty minutes later, and Han Kwang-song is probably going to disappear again after that one. North Korea didn't let off the gas, however, and finally found their equalizer in the 85th minute. So the top 4 stays as it is. Qatar had been off to a terrible start, but finally collected their first win of the window against last place Kyrgyzstan. On the second match day of October, the 2 Central Asian countries proved victorious against their foes, with Kyrgyzstan earning their first victory of the campaign. Then to cap off Group A for the month, Iran absolutely annihilated Qatar 4-1. Now looking at the table, Iran has just barely overtaken Uzbekistan at the top. UAE didn't get much out of this window, but still remain in third, while Qatar's first victory of the campaign sees them back in the thick of it.
I'm in the thick of it.
Over to Group B, it was a 3-way tie between Jordan, South Korea, and Iraq, with Kuwait and Palestine just hanging in there. South Korea was without Son Heung-min this window, however they still managed to knock Jordan off the top, winning 2-0. Oman bounced back from a horrendous September, demolishing Kuwait 4-0 at home. Ayman Hussein continued his incredible goal-scoring form with his 12th of 2024 in a 1-0 victory against Palestine. With Jordan's loss, this saw Iraq take second away with their next game against the South Koreans. And the Taeguk Warriors took the lead near the half, but then it was that man again, Ayman Hussein, with a ridiculous goal to equalize. 14 minutes later, however, Oh Hyun-gyu reclaims the lead with his second goal of the window. And then a late header from Lee Jae-sung seals the deal. Iraq did get one back, but in the end, South Korea would hold on and win 3-2. After looking like Jordan on the Wizards, the national team redeemed themselves at home with a 4-0 pummeling of Oman. Kuwait took an early lead against Palestine through a penalty. 10 minutes later though, Palestine earned themselves a pen and it's level at 1. Then with 10 minutes remaining, a perfect delivery is sent straight to Yusuf Nasser, who reclaims the lead for Kuwait. But then in the 3rd minute of stoppage time, Palestine sends a ball into the box and Zaid Kunbar saves his team from another defeat. So now looking at the table, we have a distinct leader this time in South Korea, who have yet to lose a match so far. Jordan, thanks to goal difference, hold on to second with 7 points, and tied with them in the second chance spot is Iraq. Fourth is still really anyone's to grab, with Oman holding it, but Kuwait and Palestine are just hanging in there. Finally, there's Group C, which saw Japan effortlessly at the top, with Saudi Arabia just behind them in the other automatic qualification spots. Covering the playoff spots were the 2 early shockers, Bahrain and Indonesia. Then there were the underachievers of Australia and China, and these two faced off in the ultimate mid-off, with Australia prevailing 3-1 under their new manager Tony Popovich. A few hours later, Bahrain vs Indonesia commenced. Once more, Asian nations continue to whip out some utter bullshit from absolutely nowhere, and Bahrain take an early lead. Bahrain in fact had most of the possession throughout the first half, and kept trying to score these bangers as if it was an Olympic event. However, right before the end of the half, Indonesia come in with a sneak attack and equalize. Then the 74th minute, Indonesia produce another shock as Rafael Strauch curls it beautifully into the net, and Indonesia now has a 2-1 lead. Bahrain couldn't let that slide though, and in the 9th minute of stoppage time, Mohamed Marhoun scores his second and denies Indonesia a historic victory. They announced 6 minutes of stoppage time for this, by the way. And because of this, it has unleashed a storm that I have not seen since the time Algeria was robbed against Cameroon. You have Indonesian netizens quite literally invading every single comment section relating to football imaginable. Sometimes it's not even football. And I've seen a lot of these comments too, talking about how they were robbed, joking that 90 plus 6 equals 99, and also AFC stands for Arab Football Conspiracy. More extreme cases of this mob mentality though have seen Indonesians review bomb random Bahraini businesses. Guys, it is not this f***ing deep. But let's just kind of pause for a second and ask ourselves, was Indonesia actually robbed? No, they weren't. Literally, while the board for stoppage time was being shown, there was a free kick that took more than 2 minutes because of Indonesia's time wasting. Like, the foul had happened in the 89th minute, and the free kick whistle didn't actually occur until the 92nd. And then there was another free kick towards the 4th minute of stoppage time, and that took 45 seconds. Then you had like a couple other little dead ball situations here or there that contributed to this, including one that took like 10 seconds for Indonesia to throw the ball. Indonesians, I know you want to claim that Bahrain had the ref in its pockets, or that you had no control in this game, but you did. You knew Bahrain wasn't flying like they were in the first half. You had numerous opportunities on the counter, and floundered every single time. Like, this comic I find so ironic because in the distant background, you can literally see an Indonesian player on the counter. And what I find the funniest is that, like, I know how Indonesians are on social media. And also, football accounts know that as well, you know? They're gonna act dumb, but they know. And I've just seen so many just shamelessly siding with the Indonesian fans, saying that the refs rigged and everything. Without even just thinking twice, they're just like, oh, engagement, oh, money, I need it all. Indonesians, please, please come to me. I need more Indonesians. Anyways, to cap off the first set of matches, Japan defeated Saudi Arabia 2-0, and it's the first time that Japan has actually ever defeated the Saudis away. Japan didn't have the same successes back home though, as they conceded their first goal in the entire cycle to Australia of all teams. However, they managed to bounce back after Australia had their own mishap. China took advantage of Indonesia's lack of awareness not once, but twice before the half through Zhang Yuni. And that would be enough for China's first victory, which honestly was quite a shocker considering many thought this was Indonesia's chance to earn their first.
I think it's a little bit the same as Bahrain. We play against a team, they waste time a lot.
I know that ain't who I think it is.
Then to end off Group C in October, Saudi Arabia and Bahrain played out a goalless draw. So now looking at the table, Japan continued to dominate with everyone else 5 points or more below them. And Australia, who started this window 5th, leap into 2nd thanks to their win versus China and their courage versus Japan. Tied with them is Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, who are in the second chance spots. And just sticking in there are Indonesia and China with 3 points each. Listen, I know this one was late. I was on vacation. I'm not apologizing for that. I needed that vacation. But finally, here it is. The World Cup qualifiers November review. Going into November, Argentina had the advantage. Their economy is also in shambles. Come on, tell me something new for once. A strong Colombian team remained second with Uruguay just 3 points behind them. But do not be fooled by the Uruguayans because they were winless in qualifiers throughout 2024 up to this point. Brazil did well to bounce back after being the 2 worst teams in the region. Meanwhile, from 5th all the way down to 8th, just like the US election in the first hour, too close to call. November began with a ridiculous free kick from one of the world's most informed men at the moment. However, just moments into the second half, Venezuela comes storming and equalize. But then in the 58th minute, with Vini Jr. on the break, Venezuela's keeper completely misses the ball and Brazil are awarded a penalty. Vini Jr. steps up and wow. That was awful. The game ends 1-1, but not without some controversy. During a Brazilian corner in the 3rd minute of stoppage time, the Venezuelans defended it using their water sprinklers. Also, being on the pitch for a solid 9 minutes, Alexander Gonzalez slapped up 2 Brazilians in a matter of 30 seconds and saw red. So you know what that means. Under Gustavo Alfaro, Paraguay has been revived from the dead thanks to their defense, but it only took Argentina just 10 minutes to penetrate it. However, Alfaro had another trick up his sleeve, the ability to affect the construct of time and space itself. Antonio Sanabria pulls off some Mario Strikers bullshit and Paraguay equalized just 8 minutes later. Then a minute into the second half, La Albiroja execute a set piece to perfection as if they're Arsenal themselves, and for the first time in 8 years, Paraguay has upsetted the world champions. Now, on a completely different side note, while searching up this information, I made this typo. Make do with that what you want. Bolivia have seemingly lost the powers they gain every 30 years as they suffer yet another big defeat, this time to Ecuador. And don't forget, another Bolivian red card. For Ecuador, they've been in pretty subpar form throughout this year, so they'll hope to carry this momentum forward. Now, can I just say, by the way, these videos feel like a 2010 Sports Center of, like, the World Cup qualifiers. I can't be the only one that feels this way. Anyways, Colombia versus Uruguay. What a match! 30 minutes played, Colombia's Juan Quintero catches the keeper snoozing at the near post, 1-0 to Los Cafeteros. 56th minute now, Uruguay's Marcelo Soraki squares it in the middle and Davison Sanchez makes a grave error in judgment. Now listen. The last time a Colombian defender conceded an own goal similar to this, he was shot by a cartel member 9 days later. Luckily, it's been almost a month now, so I think we're in the clear. That own goal seemed to have shell-shocked the Colombians though, because just 3 minutes later, Uruguay make it look almost too easy and take the lead this time. Now here's a chance for Bielsa's men to seal the deal with little time remaining, but Camilo Vargas makes a ridiculous save. And his heroics are rewarded with Colombia going the other direction and scoring the equalizer in the 5th minute of stoppage time. Now, this should have been the end, but in classic CONMEBOL fashion, VAR took about 900 years to confirm the goal. So now comes Uruguay in the 13th minute of stoppage time. And after the ball bounces around a couple times, Manuel Ugarte thumps an emphatic winner. Wah, wah, wah. I hate international break. Shut the fuck up, nerd! Uruguay get their first qualifier win in 2024, and it's a huge one. Then to finish off matchday 11, we had the 2 worst teams in the region face off against each other. This match was probably shit. I don't need to watch the highlights. Let's move on. Gustavo Alfaro may be able to revive teams and fix entire economies, however, he was still no match for the deities of El Alto as Bolivia get back on the score sheet early on. However, after a mistake in the back and some god-awful defending, Paraguay take advantage and equalize in the 70th minute. 5 minutes later though, Paraguay concede a penalty, and after a typical long-ass VAR check, Miguel Terceros puts the Altitude Alphas back up top. Meanwhile, a massive fight breaks out between both teams, but Terceros remains completely unbothered. This fight, however, did spawn 2 more red cards for November. Now chasing the game again, Paraguay's Julio Enciso decides to take matters into his own hands as he gets past one, fools another, and then just nonchalantly sends a rocket into the net. God damn. In the end, the game finishes 2-2 as both teams share the points. Enner Valencia continues to show the world that age is just a number. Over in Argentina, Lautaro Martinez was inspired by his idol Antonio Sanabria, and with an insane acrobatic effort, he gives the Albiceleste another 3 points versus Peru. Venezuela were off to a great start versus Chile, but then just 7 minutes later, they conceded to an Eduardo Vargas who I am pretty certain had GMOs injected into him. Fortunately for Venezuela, they retook the lead just 2 minutes later, and then they collapsed against a team with the second worst attack in the region. This loss for La Vinotinto could really bite them back in the ass later on. And finally, to finish off the November window, Brazil and Uruguay would share the points in Salvador. So now looking at the standings, things have changed a good bit. Argentina, despite dropping points again, still have a strong 5-point lead at the top. Uruguay, after literally going winless for pretty much the entirety of 2024, actually take over second after Colombia lost twice. Los Cafeteros now find themselves actually 4th though, as Ecuador's 2 wins see them hop into 3rd. Brazil isn't too far off in 5th, again another underwhelming window, but they're still relatively safe at the moment. Paraguay once again hold on to the last spot, but now have a 4-point cushion. Bolivia still find themselves in the playoff spot thanks to their draw with Paraguay, and after fumbling a golden opportunity, Venezuela once again find themselves in danger. Oh, also there's like the other 2 teams. No one cares about them. Over to Oceania, where we saw the rest of the second round play out. In Group A, it was New Caledonia and Fiji being seen as the likely candidates to advance, but not if the Solomon Islands have anything to say about it, as after 39 minutes, they found themselves 2-1 up versus New Caledonia. However, the Bonitos collapsed in the second half and lost 3-2, pretty much kissing their qualification hopes goodbye. Meanwhile, in the PNG, Image File FC stunned the Fijians just 2 minutes in thanks to a goal from Joe. Fiji then respond just before halftime, but before they could even collect their thoughts for the second half, Papua New Guinea scores again. Once more, however, Fiji find a way to respond, and this time it's their talisman Roy Krishna in the 54th minute. But the PNG men just won't let it go. Into the 4th minute of stoppage time, Raymond Gunemba towers over the Fijian keeper, and once again Papua New Guinea regain the lead. However, Fiji find a way to respond and equalize for a 3rd straight time just a minute later. With that last minute game saver as well, this now officially saw the end of the road for the Solomon Islands alongside Papua New Guinea in World Cup qualifiers. Both Fiji and New Caledonia were confirmed for the next round, and after a draw between the two on the final match day, New Caledonia would win the group. Or in other words, New Caledonia wouldn't have to face New Zealand in the next round. Oh come on Maxwell, that's unfair to the other competitors. Like, just give them a chance. New Zealand scored 8 goals in both of their matches this month.
So I just do things that make me miserable, and they find it funny.
Wow.
So
it's crazy.
Meanwhile, the Kiwis' first victims, Tahiti, did well to bounce back with 2 wins to finish runners-up in Group B. Last, we have Asia, and what better way to start than with North Korea versus Iran? In football, don't worry, the world isn't ending yet. Like their missiles, Iran was often flying towards the net. Thanks to Gayedi and a brace from Mohebi, the Iranians had a 3-0 lead in the first half. However, after Iran went down to 10 men, North Korea nearly came back, but just like their missiles, they came up short in the Sea of Japan. Over in Doha, the Qataris did well to build a 2-0 lead versus Uzbekistan early on. However, then with just 15 minutes remaining, the Uzbeks respond twice through the head of the future. But just when we thought the Uzbeks wouldn't fuck this one, Qatar took things into their own hands as a naturalized Brazilian finds the winner for them in the 12th minute of stoppage time. Whether it was Uzbek incompetence or the referees favoring Qatar, that's for you to decide. The UAE collect their first qualifier victory since September after scoring 3 past Kyrgyzstan. After letting it slip versus Qatar, Uzbekistan bounced back with a 1-0 win versus North Korea to narrowly stay in the top 2. The team above them in standings, Iran, once again started well as they scored 2 early goals versus Kyrgyzstan. Again though, Iran fumbled the bag, conceding twice, but thankfully Sardar Azmoun not only saves them from embarrassment, but now confirms Iran at least to spawn the 4th round. Finally, to end Group A in November, the UAE are good now? There's no doubt Qatar has shown themselves to be frauds in these qualifiers, but 5-0? By the way, 4 of those goals came from, you guessed it, a naturalized Brazilian. Now looking at the table, no one has changed positions, but after their 2 impressive victories, the UAE are covering ground on second place Uzbekistan. Moving on to Group B, South Korea make easy work of Kuwait with a 3-1 victory. Oman continue to find their old form as they steal away all 3 points from Palestine. And in Basra, the current 2nd and 3rd place teams of Jordan and Iraq play out a 0-0 draw. Speaking of Jordan, Palestine played South Korea there next, and the Palestinians would take advantage of a god-awful back pass to stun the Samsung economy early on. 3 minutes later, however, Son Heung-min responds. From there, South Korea seek the second goal, but to no avail. So the game ends 1-1. Once again, another incredible display of resilience by the Palestinians, which Son himself even commented on after the match. Later on, deja vu occurred in Muscat as the Iraqis once more defeated Oman 1-0, and surprise, surprise, the sole goal scorer this time wasn't Ayman Hussein. And to finally end Group B, Jordan once again dropped the ball against Kuwait. With that result, Iraq now takes second away and hold a 2-point cushion. Not much else changes besides the fact that Oman are now 3 points behind third as opposed to 4 points. Finally, Group C, which has been much more entertaining to see unfold than I previously imagined. But it didn't really start that way, as we were all subjected to one of the worst games of football this year in Saudi Arabia vs Australia. For me though, it was a little more tolerable as I was watching it with my good friend Ryota-san. Shout out Ryota-san. Chinese Darwin Nunez shocks the entire continent by giving his country their first away victory in almost a year. This is also China's first clean sheet in 22 games. The last time they had one, June 2021 versus the Maldives. Japan gave me the best birthday anyone could have as I ate some delicious pizza and witnessed Indonesia lose 4-0. And a Justin Hubner own goal to kick it off. Cheers to that, everyone. Japan would then end November with more dominance in their very next game with a 3-1 victory in China. To the surprise of everyone, we realized Australia was still capable of actually putting a ball into the net. Bahrain, though, known for just whipping out utter bullshit from nothing, equalized in the 75th minute. And then just 2 minutes later, they take the lead. This guy's been on the pitch for like 10 minutes and he has 2 goals. Australia's Kusni Yengi wanted in on this party too though, and he'd grab a brace for himself and save Australia a point in the 6 minute of stoppage time. Alright Saudi Arabia, first time you were caught off guard, but now you got Renard back, so I know you guys are prepared this time. Revoke the 2034 World Cup from these frauds immediately! Indonesia would then find a second goal through a defense that I honestly think might be worse than France's match no line. So thank you, Saudi Arabia. Now my DMs are just filled with this fucking image and this fucking video now. I just look like a dumbass! Listen, Saudi Arabia. I wish nothing but the best for your country, and I sure hope that one day it doesn't fall. I'm serious, outside of Japan, who occupy more of this than my Spotify Unwrapped, this is gonna be the most insane and entertaining group going forward. From second all the way to the very bottom is just a point difference. No one is in, and no one is especially out. I cannot wait to see this resume in March, and yes, that's right, no international break until March. Yay, more dead club football, the virgins on Twitter say after refusing to watch anything but England in the UEFA Nations League. And so that is your World Cup November qualifiers review. We won't be seeing any more of these until March, but March is gonna be a big one because you know what's coming up? UEFA. And just to give you guys a little bit of a taste of what we're gonna see, this is one of the groups. Jesus Christ, FIFA. But until then, at least we can give a massive thank you, a massive shout out to all our members, including Janos Balas, Chupas, Brazilian Fury, Respect the Jeff, Othman JN, Habakkuk, Jeremiah Owusu Ajimang, Django, Sexy Asian Diddler, Adnazir Makalankam, Alex Rod, Ulta, Miguel Munoz, Return Fire, Rory Burns, Slider Kid, Sniffrix, Taco Okafan, The Cypriot 35, Not Windows 95 Man, Kentra Agatra, Big Boris, The Baby Eater II, Kerbo, Unkwell, St. Terrence, Sylvia Citrus, Ryan Jans, Wise Orange, Rashford Enthusiast, Cocosaurus Rex, LeJames Braun, Samu, Justum RC, Cheese Bake, Cooper Rory, The Somali Pirate, Claymore Roomba, Winder Gel, M4 Does Stuff, Finn Likes Rugby More, Davox, The Portergeyser, TPSK25, Polar Protos, Von Fan, Lucien Von Croix, Ethan Bennett Loves Kavicha, Gazegos Brescia Kivigs, Mano Tango Fei, Adrian, A Ghostly Owl, Coney Wolves, Mud Tenai, Nava, Sketchy Card, KM89, Apollo, Kevin Mojica, Chris Visconsi, Dominic Griffin, Kyler Krebs, Mohammed Altanib, Niche, Patrick Barley, Rashford God 5, Raspberry Ale, and Unbroken Persona. If you'd like to join the fourth wall, the member page, website, whatever, there'll be a link down below and up in the invitations. You can follow me on Twitter if you want, follow my Instagram if you like, follow me on Twitch. I sometimes stream there. I would like to do more in 2025. Again though, no promises there. But until then, I'll see you guys.